you want to do introductions first? Or him
Wherever
speak?
you
Well, he's already at the podium, so let's let him. I've got 10 o'clock. I guess 9 o'clock down here. But I want to welcome everybody this morning, and we want to hear from Dr. Rashawn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to just take a minute of your time just to welcome Chairman and the entire committee, and thank you all for being on campus. I also wanted to welcome the audience. For those of you who live in the USI, for a beautiful city, welcome to Evansville. I also would like, if you wouldn't mind, just to pay recognition to our staff. We have an amazing team of individuals who have worked so hard to prepare for your arrival and your visit. And I hope that our hospitality has been witnessed and been felt by us as a very sincere offering. So I want to thank the staff as well. Last thing I want to do is wish you all well with regard to your meeting, and wish you well travels home. If there's anything that I can do personally, please call upon me directly. I look forward to partnering with each and every one of you all. And again, thank you for choosing USI as a place to have your meeting. Have a great day.
Thank you. I think what we'll do first is go around and do some introductions. Eric, you want to start?
Eric Gonzalez, House Democrat, Fiscal Analyst.
Representative Greg Porter, Indianapolis, House District 96.
State Senator Greg Taylor, Senate District 33, Indianapolis.
Susan Preble, Senate Democrat, Fiscal Analyst.
Karen Talion, Senate District 4, almost as far as you can be away from Evansville.
Jason Dudich, State Budget Director.
David Reynolds, Fiscal Analyst, Senate Republican Caucus.
Ryan Mishler, State Senate District 9 out of Bremen, representing North Central Indiana.
Tim Brown, House District 41, West Central Indiana, Crawfordsville.
Ben Tooley, House Republican, Fiscal Analyst.
Bob Cherry, State Representative, District 53 from Greenfield, represent parts of Hancock and Madison County. I'm the alternate on the House Republican.
Alicia Nafziger, House Republican, Fiscal Analyst.
State Senator Liz Brown, District 15. Thank you very much for your hospitality. My first time to Evansville and an alternate to the budget.
Seth Hinshaw, Senate Republican, Fiscal Analyst.
Zach Jackson, Deputy Budget Director.
Lisa Appelbert, Deputy Budget Director.
Randhir Jha, Legislative Services Agency.
And I want to thank Alicia. This is her last budget committee before she moves on to Commission for Higher Education. So thanks, Alicia. We've distributed the minutes from the last meeting. Is there any amendments to the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the June minutes.
Is there a second? Senator Talion, can we take that by consent?
I'm good. I second it. Yeah.
Can we take that by consent?
Consent.
The agenda's placed on the table for discussion. We're going to start with State Fair. The State Fair Commission, Ray Allison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to present before you today. As you said, my name is Ray Allison. I'm the Vice President of Administration for the Indiana State Fair Commission. I'm joined today by our new Chief Financial Officer, John Peffenberger. This is day 3 on the job for him. So we pulled him away from the State Fair to come down here for this meeting. The Great Indiana State Fair is wrapping up this weekend. 5 days left, counting today. We're having a really good run so far. A little bit of weather at the beginning of the fair caused some hiccups, but we've recovered nicely, and I'll pull the attendance numbers together when I get back today, but I think we may have set a record on a Tuesday for yesterday's. So really strong Indiana State Fair. Your state fair is recognized throughout the industry as being one of the best in the country, especially for ag education, and we're known for having one of the finest fairs in the country. Several fairs schedule trips to our fair every year to see us. This year we had representatives from South Carolina, Virginia, Minnesota, and Florida. They all come to learn about ag education from the Indiana State Fair, so that makes us very proud, and we hope it makes all of you proud of your state fair. The current biennial budget includes a total appropriation of $4 million for R&R for the Indiana State Fair Commission. I'm here today to ask for the remaining $2 million of the appropriation to be released for projects scheduled in fiscal year 2019. This $2 million will be used for critically needed deferred repair and replacement projects, including replacing HVAC control units in 4 buildings, replacing surface mount units to rooftop units in the South Pavilion, and then valve replacement in other buildings. Electrical panel replacements in some additional buildings, tuck pointing on 6 buildings of various levels of need, including the Blue Ribbon Pavilion, Discovery Hall, the Swine Barn, the West Pavilion, Centennial Hall, and the South Pavilion. Complete roof replacements on 3 buildings, including Indiana Arts, the Administration Building, the Northwest Pavilion, or the Poultry and Rabbit Barn, for those of you that know that side of the fair, and roofing repairs on the Coliseum entrance canopy. And then last but certainly not least, repairs around the grounds needed for ADA access to several buildings, including damaged sidewalks, ramps, stairs, and curb cuts. These projects are all recommended in a facility assessment that was completed in 2017 by the A&E firm Schmidt and Associates. Needed repairs in this assessment were cataloged and were ranked by urgency. All of the projects submitted today were considered most urgent. As mentioned, these projects have been deferred, and we are eager to begin the repairs immediately following the conclusion of this year's Indiana State Fair. We thank you for your support of mitigating deferred maintenance over this last biennial budget. We've made progress, but with the age and size of our campus, there still needs to be met. We have a robust strategic plan to be completed in 2020 that raises the bar for our customer experience and elevates the necessity of our master plan. I'm happy to share any details of that if you're interested. Thank you again for the opportunity to present before you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Ray?
Thank you. So the State Fair happens to be in my district, and I wanted to ask, I went on a tour last year with Cindy Hoy and talked about water and other things that were damaging the swine barn. Where are we at on that?
The swine barn is part of our master plan. It's
Okay.
at the top of the list in our master plan, and we're working and having conversations with a lot of parties, including those in state government, about what that would look like moving forward and when that project could be completed, but nothing has been definitively decided yet.
Okay, so you do know how much it's gonna cost. Having gone again this year, I see the deterioration getting worse, actually.
We've done some preliminary studies with an A&E firm
Okay.
To look at a renovation of that project, but to this point, they're just preliminary budget numbers.
Okay.
We don't have exact costing. We haven't gone to that step in the A&E process yet.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next will be Superintendent Doug Carter.
Yeah, is that what they're saying?
Yeah, that's what I remember.
Good morning. I first want to say I really enjoyed knocking around the city of Evansville last night. That was a pleasure. So thank you for the warm welcome. Let's hear from them. I have with me Major Steve Holland, the commander of the State Police Laboratory, Major Jerry Williams, who sits on my staff, Brian Renner's here from IDOA, as well as Matt Kent. We spent a tremendous amount of time with an extraordinary effort to evaluate what we do and why. What does this project mean to the ISP? And the study revealed that the facility review that was done, that the facilities in Evansville, or in Fort Wayne and in Lowell, are the facilities that need to be replaced. So we're here to request that funding. There was, it's about $29.5 million, and it's an exciting day. It's just an exciting day for the ISP. This exhaustive review allowed us to evaluate a facility and facilities that were built in the 1970s. And as you can imagine, science has changed since the 1970s. At that time, DNA was just a pipe dream. And then we transitioned to the DNA analysis that allowed us to do DNA on tangible things. Now we're doing trace DNA on things that you can't even see, that the human eye can't see. but we're still doing it in the same square footage as with a building that was built in the 1970s. This investment has been a significant approach. We've had a significant approach to this investment over time, and rather than meet a need of today or even over the course of the next 5 years, Jason has pushed us to really evaluate what we're doing and why, and will this meet our needs over time, and I believe that it will. We lack capacity currently to meet the caseload of today, and we're woefully underprepared for what we know the caseload will be in the future. So now is the time, and I couldn't be more thrilled for the support that you've given us. Energy efficiency standards, space for personnel and processing that would offer maximum operations as we move forward. There's only one other lab in Indiana. It's in the city of Indianapolis. So we support 91 counties and every police agency in all of those 91 counties. And now we're even starting to support in some form or fashion the city of Indianapolis and the crime lab that is within the city. So there's a lot happening, of course. Once construction is complete, the existing facilities will be turned into long-term storage, which again solves a problem that we've had for many, many years, actually even decades. So I appreciate your thoughtful consideration to this project. I stand ready to answer any questions that you might have. While I'm the face of it, I'm certainly not the expert, so the experts are sitting behind me. So thank you for your time. I'll answer any questions.
Any questions for Superintendent Carter? Senator Tanya.
Thank you. Yeah, I know that I don't know about Fort Wayne, but I know that facility in Lowell is looking a little shoddy. Will these be complete replacements?
They will.
All right, and the old facility at Lowell will be
That will
torn?
be turned into a long-term storage and support services area for the ISP, but that building will maintain. There's enough property there. There was a thoughtful consideration 40-some years ago to maximize that footprint for future growth. And at all of these facilities, during the facility review, we found that. So the good news is the facilities that are currently there can stay.
But you're staying in the same location?
We are, yes.
Okay, and will these new facilities help you get over some of the backlog that you used to have on all the testing and?
The only backlog we have now is on drugs, but everything else is within the margin of accreditation.
Okay.
So we're in a really good place, but we're struggling with the whole drug epidemic, as many of you have talked with me about over time. So that's still a very significant challenge for us.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome, Senator.
Any other questions? Mr. Dudich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, in terms of the facility in Indianapolis, that is a state facility, but that's managed and, I don't want to say overseen, but in terms of property management, is overseen by a third party, and that facility is in great condition and has been, had a lot of preventative maintenance put into it. Are you and the Department of Administration open to creating that same model in Fort Wayne and Lowell, where there could be a third-party property management entity that could help maintain those facilities? Obviously, that's important to the state when we maintain those facilities. Is that an open discussion, that replicating that model in Indianapolis and these new facilities in Fort Wayne and then Lowell?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, yes. We've found that history is a pretty good predictor of our future. And that investment that many of you made all those years ago, in that facility at 16th and Senate, and the way in which it's been managed, it still looks like a brand new facility. So I think that's the challenge for me, and it's what you should expect from me, is to bring those ideas and then support the notion of outsourcing some of those things that we currently do, that we know we're going to need to do over time.
And I think, I saw some odd faces. I think it's 16th and MLK, not 16th and Senate,
yes.
unless there was a new building we didn't know about, so.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug, appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Next is Brigadier General Ronald Westfall.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So, as you just heard, I'm Brigadier General Westfall. I'm the Director of the Joint Staff for the Indiana National Guard, and pleased to be here this morning. Beautiful venue. What a view outside looking at that lake. So, just so you know, Major General Carr couldn't be here today. He's currently overseas. He is in Kuwait, visiting some of the soldiers and airmen that we currently have deployed overseas, which we have several. In fact, I think I'm tracking about 15 different countries we actually have soldiers and airmen in right now, so a lot more than people realize. But one of our largest units, the 38th Sustainment Brigade, is currently in Kuwait. They're headquartered out of Kokomo. They mobilized earlier this year, and we're hoping to have them back home right around Thanksgiving timeframe. So he'll be seeing them over there. Things are going well for us. We continue to get new force structure into the state, which makes us a larger entity. We just got the SFAB, Security Forces Assistance Brigade headquarters. That's a brand new force structure for the Army. There's only 6 in the entire Army, and there's only 1 in the National Guard. And we have that headquartered here in Indiana. So we're just getting ready to stand that up this fall. And we're keeping our fingers crossed for some new force structure of a cyber battalion, which is on the top of everybody's mind as technology continues to go the way it is. So we haven't got that word yet, but we're keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that comes as well. So we are continuing to grow, that is for sure. So I've got 4 items today to talk about. The first one is actually rehabilitation and repurpose of our Bluffton Armory. Now this armory is one of our oldest in the state and is currently in the top 10 of our worst conditioned armories out of 68 locations across the state. It is also one of 3 armories that are listed with a quality rating of 4, and for us that means the worst there is, our lowest rating, and is our number 2 priority among all of our locations to fix. It is completely outdated, way too small. I think it's 64% capacity of what we need, so it definitely needs repurposed. The state share for that total cost is $790,000. And so I've got 3 more. I can either go through all 3 or take questions with each one, whichever way you'd prefer me to
Let's
proceed.
go through them all, and then we'll come back to the
Okay,
questions.
that'll work. All right, so our second priority, or excuse me, our second project is actually for a series of roof replacements for 6 different facilities. Now these 6 include the Fort Wayne Armory, the Brazil Armory, the Marion Armory, the Bluffton Motor Vehicle Storage Building, which is a separate building than the Armory, which I mentioned in the first project, the Remington Motor Vehicle Storage Building, and the Huntington Motor Vehicle Storage Building. All 6 of these are between 30 and 68 years old. So the state share for this particular project of 6 roofs, $688,450. Our third project is actually 3 different facilities. All of them is a boiler replacement. These include the 3 locations of Terre Haute, Connorsville, and Kokomo. Now these boilers are respectively 38, 31, and 31 years old. So they definitely have been around a while. And an average boiler life is about 30 years. So we've pretty much reached max capacity on these 3. The state share for these 3 facilities, $233,000. And then our fourth project is actually for a building management system to replace the antiquated one we have within Building 3 at our state headquarters there at Stout Field. Now the current system is out of date and cannot keep up with the demands of the building, and it also does not integrate with Buildings 1 and 2. Now for us, Buildings 1, 2, and 3 are all connected. They're listed as separate buildings, but they're all one big complex connected together. About 3 years ago, we finished the rehab on Buildings 1 and 2. Building 3 did not get that, especially in this particular system. Building 3 is also where we have our computer server room. So it's vital for us to maintain tight environmental controls because of those servers and the computers in there. And also, replacing this system will greatly improve the energy conservation in that particular building. That's what we did with the other 2 buildings, and it's definitely saved us on the utility cost. State share on this project, $150,000. So those are the 4 projects. If any of you have any questions on any one of those 4. Yes, ma'am?
Thank you. Did I hear you say that the National Guard has 68 facilities in Indiana?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, excuse my, what do you do at all those facilities?
We have units at each one of those. So we have currently just under 12,000 soldiers and 2,000 airmen spread throughout the state. The airmen are in the 2 wings in Terre Haute and Fort Wayne. And the soldiers are spread throughout the armories all over the state, from South Bend to Madison, Evansville to Fort Wayne.
Really? And are these projects, these rehab projects, are they always a 50-50 match with the feds?
Not always. It depends on the armory. Some armories we have are 100% federal. Some are 50-50. Some are 75-25. It depends on how they were built, and so it kind of varies. Am I speaking out of turn, Steve? You're right on target. Okay. These particular ones are 50-50.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Brown.
Thank you, General Westfall, and appreciate everything that you do for our country and for the state of Indiana.
Thank you.
I know putting your life out on the line and everyone's life out there is very important. A little bit of follow-up with Senator Talion. Our demographics and statistics projections through 2050 show that some of the rural counties are going to be declining in population. And so of these 68 facilities, is there any long-term plan about how this declining population are going to impact these armories? And in the future, will there be a consolidation of some of these armories?
So to answer your question, we've done a similar study about demographics. Actually, this was a national effort put on by National Guard Bureau. All 54 states and territories kind of went through this same project. We completed it 3 years ago, Steve? So about 3 years ago, we completed that. We do have a plan based on those demographics and looking ahead into the future to do some consolidation. Now, the plan overall will potentially close some armories, but only to build new ones. Because as you look through the age of our armories and the condition, some of them are pretty old. And they are also too small for the type of units we have, the type of equipment we have, all those kinds of things today. So there is a long-term plan to consolidate potentially all the way down to 45 armories. But again, that includes building new ones. Kind of like Johnson County when we built that. We currently have a project in the means with Atlanta Armory in Hamilton County that will potentially consolidate some armories. But this is a long-term plan. I mean, we're talking 30 to 45 years in the future. And the way military construction money comes to the state from the federal side, our next project that we have planned, we probably won't see the light of day on that for at least 7 years. And that's just the first project. So it's going to be a while. Let me put it that way. But we do have a plan based on those demographics and exactly what you're talking about.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that makes me feel a lot better because actually, in item number, the second item of your list, in Remington, I think of the population base in Remington, and it ain't growing in Remington, and what's happening.
So
there.
in the when we looked at the study, some armories we're just going to improve and keep. Some armories we could potentially close and then consolidate and build a bigger armory. That will probably change over time. The plan that we have, demographics are a plan. 20 years from now, it could change.
Right.
So we'll kind of flux and go from there.
I appreciate your forward thinking on that. On the building management system, is the vendor that you're getting for this able to do software updates as they become available in the future? Do you think there's adaptability to that going forward as technology changes about every 6 months?
Steve Hines, Facility Manager for the Indiana National Guard. Yes, sir. So when we did the rehab projects in Building 1 and 2, which are attached to 3, we went to the latest technology that allows us to program and control the environment within those facilities. Looking to do the same thing with Building 3, nest that so that they're interoperable and scalable. And as the General mentioned, the criticality of that particular building, it is the hub from a server perspective of the entire state, as well as our telecommunication system. But ultimately, it all be seamless from a building controls and building management system.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, and I also want to echo Representative Brown's comments and appreciate what you do for Indiana and our country. But I have a question. When you said that the different armories, the funding is depending on how and when they were built. So is part of the plan that you have, which I hope that you share with us if you can, but as part of the plan, does it also depend on whether it's 100%, 50/50, or 75/25% share? Are you able to consolidate, move things around easier if there's more of a state share as opposed to 100% federally funded?
I don't know that we took that into account, but go ahead, Steve. Steve can answer that. Steve was intimately involved in this project, so I'm gonna allow him to answer if you don't mind, please.
Great question, ma'am. So, the amount of funding, whether it be a state share or a Fed share, is derived, basically either by who owns the land. If it's federal land, it's typically then always 100% or 75/25, Fed, state. If it's state-owned land, which, most of our armories are, in a state-owned facility, that's why we're asking for support, they're generally 50/50. So that kind of, lays out, the funding model, I guess, so to speak. Then, as we looked at the facilities, I always try and leverage, from a budget perspective, the greatest amount of federal dollar I can to apply to the projects. So in this case, we stacked all the armories worst to first, just as most people will. Tried to handle as much backlog maintenance repair as we could. If it was a viable armory that had great, I shouldn't say great, but strong demographics, great recruiting, and a great lineage as a community relationship with our units. So all those factors come into play. Typically, though, we start there and then work our way down the list. And I don't typically bump a project because it needs a state share. We'll come ask for the state share. If we don't get a state share, then we do have to then fall down the list to a project that is purely federal in nature, because we do have the federal funds.
Well, it does, and I thought that might be part of it. I guess my concern is that I would like to see it be as strategic as possible, because I appreciate your fiscal concern and trying to get as many federal dollars as opposed to state dollars, but I'm sure to your point, 7-year out, and, as you mentioned, demographics change, so all of that great planning is for naught when the timing comes up at the federal level, since they move so not swiftly. But the flip side is, for us, if we are paying 50% to put Band-Aids on things, if we can consolidate sooner, even though we're going to take a bigger hit, maybe in the long run, that might be more efficient for us. And so I was just wondering if there were, besides the length of time, if there are restrictions, so.
Yes, ma'am. So an example would be this Bluffton Armory that we asked for funding support for. It is 50/50, and that's the maintenance repair portion of it. But we were able to leverage 100% federal in addition to that, to construct, in addition to the facility, to make it more viable and more functional for the unit that's stationed there. So I will continue to try and leverage those opportunities, but ultimately, to answer your question, the state share is typically the long pole in the tent and when it comes to the facility management. Lack of state share. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Next is Department of Natural Resources, Mike Smith.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present 4 projects on the agenda, the first of which is State Parks General Rehab. The Division of State Parks is requesting $2 million in funding to perform rehabilitation at 31 properties across the state. This request includes 42 projects deemed of high priority, examples of which are new roofs and roof repair, replacement of windows, cabin repair, comfort station repair, and furnace and plumbing replacement. The Division of State Parks generated over $33 million in revenue in fiscal 18, which exceeded 2017's revenue by $1 million. Of the $33 million, gate attendance was $10 million, and camping revenue was almost $15 million. Project number 2, wastewater treatment. DNR is requesting $1.1 million in design and replacement of the Harmony State Park wastewater treatment plant and design only for the Tippecanoe River State Park plant. Both of the plants were constructed approximately 40 years ago and have exceeded their useful life. The plan for both is to replace the existing plants with a constructed wetland treatment facility. When possible and economically feasible, we make every attempt to hook onto neighboring communities' systems. Of the approximately 30 park properties, around 10 are hooked up around community systems, and 20 have their own plants or systems. The third project is the Toboggan Track and Warming Center. The Division of State Parks is requesting funding to rehabilitate the toboggan track at Pokagon State Park. The track was originally constructed in 1935 and has had numerous repairs over the years. Repair to the refrigeration lines and warming center are in need at this time. The attraction is open from Thanksgiving through February and has over 100,000 visitors and generates over $100,000 annually, and it's a staple in the community. The park has spent almost $200,000 over the last 6 years addressing several mechanical issues. The fourth project is Hardy Lake Dam. DNR is requesting funds to perform necessary maintenance on a bridge, valve systems, and perform embankment repairs at Hardy Lake, which is near Austin in Scott County. The dam was built in 1970. The paint on the bridge contains lead and requires some remediation. The lake is used as a water supply.
Any questions? No, Mike, I don't think I've ever been to a budget committee meeting that you didn't present, so you're a veteran.
We're having fun, aren't we? We missed you on Monday, by the way, at the East Fork Fish Hatchery.
5.5 hour drive, sorry.
That's it. Good to see everybody.
Thank you. Next is Kankakee River Basin Commission, Jody Melton.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here and considering our request. The River Basin Commission is asking for release of $600,000 from the Build Indiana Fund. We have $150,000 in local match that we were asked to get when this appropriation was made. You may know in February and March of this year, we had almost a perfect storm. We set some records. It was not the biggest storm we ever had on the Kankakee, but the city of Plymouth hit its historic flood. City of Rensselaer on Iroquois, which goes into the Kankakee, also hit a historic level. We lost riverbanks in all 8 counties in Indiana, and we had probably 100,000 acres underwater at one time. We used some of our funds. The counties used some of their funds. Some of those repairs have been made. We need to continue to make the repairs just to get the river back where it was. We had a lot of log jams and debris in the river that had to be cleared. We have asked all the county surveyors to survey their stretch of the river and put together a plan for what they need to get done. And we're creating a comprehensive plan with all those surveyors so nobody hurts anybody else. You know, we don't want St. Joe County on the upper end to dump a lot of water on Jasper County on the lower end. When we had those conversations, we also got into conversations with the state of Illinois. The Kankakee River crosses the Indiana-Illinois state line and goes another 60 miles into Illinois, where the Kankakee joins the Des Plaines out of Chicago, and it becomes the Illinois River. over the years, the Illinois side of the Kankakee has silted in. They've got all kind of problems. And so we have been meeting with them, and Kankakee County, Illinois, and Iroquois County, Illinois are going to participate with us on the comprehensive plan that we're putting together to see if we can't solve some of these problems. So today I'm just asking for release of this money, and I will assure you that the counties are looking at raising assessments on their own, so we don't have to keep coming down here looking for money, and we can find a final solution. Well, probably not a final solution, but we'll have a final funding source to keep this thing going. As you know, the Kankakee was a dredged river, and we have to maintain it. And Senator Tallien, we're just south of your district, so we're almost as far away from home, and the waters of Bremen make the Kankakee River eventually. So,
So-
see, there you go. It was not a good time.
No.
It was not a good time.
Any questions? Senator Tallien.
Jody, will this money help do some of that levee protection that's still this year?
Yes. As soon as I get it turned over, most of the surveyors are ready to do some of that emergency work that needs to be done, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that this might be Jody's last meeting. He's going to retire, and I want to publicly thank you for all the work that you've done for many, many years.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Jody. Wait a minute. Representative Brown?
I'm sorry,
You're
I have
not
a
done yet.
question. Thank you. Representative Gutwein in that area was involved in some volunteer efforts to clear some of the jams. Is that going to be an ongoing issue or problem where there can be some private volunteers to help with some of the spring jams that occur?
Absolutely, and yes, Representative Gutwein, Representative Pressel, both were out there with the sandbags and the people clearing some of that debris away. And we have used that in the past. Sometimes it takes major equipment to get in there, and we can't use the volunteers, but the farmers are pretty good, and they have the equipment. And
And that will
if you know
be-
Representative Gutwein, he was out there leading the charge.
Yeah, and he was very adamant that they had some of the equipment ready. The county surveyors, they're prepared to kind of shoulder the expense that will be needed as this goes through?
That's where we're pushing this whole project, yes.
Okay.
And Representative Gutwein's pushing that too. He's been coming to our meetings, and he's had some meetings with the county surveyors, telling them how they need to work this out.
Okay.
But yes, that's the plan, is we're looking at county assessments finally for the Kankakee watershed.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of the issue, I think, Senator Tallien and Senator Mishler, the county government's going to have to probably empower their surveyor to make sure this happens, because surveyor's office are probably lower down on the pecking order when it comes to priority in county budgets. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm writing that down. All right, next we have the Maumee River Basin Commission, Rodney Rankenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the State Budget Committee. I'm Rod Rinkenberger, the Executive Director of the Maumee River Basin Commission. The Maumee River Basin Commission was established by the state legislature in 1986 to mitigate flood damages and improve water quality in 6 northeast Indiana counties. I'm here today requesting the release of $77,100 in Build Indiana funds for 6 of our flood mitigation and water quality improvement projects, totaling $245,866. 4 of the projects are wetland restoration projects, trying to mitigate and restore those wetlands and hold the floodwaters up in the upland area to protect the cities of Auburn and Fort Wayne and Decatur. Those 4 projects will restore a total of 28 acres of wetland and improve water quality and environmental habitat. Another project is to purchase a home in the city of Auburn that is subject to repeated flooding, and it's also located within a regulatory floodway. So we're trying to remove those homes and structures out of harm's way. The other project is a stream assessment study on the St. Mary's River. For those of you that aren't familiar with Northeast Indiana, my basin actually receives our water from the state of Ohio, and it comes in through Indiana and then exits back out into Ohio. And one of the big things right now is in the western Lake Erie Basin with algal blooms or algae blooms. And we're trying to improve the water quality and prevent the state of Indiana from being required to address that and expend millions of dollars of trying to improve that water when it may be coming from our neighboring state. So we are performing the stream assessment study. We're going to look at sources of dissolved reactive phosphorus, fluvial erosion, and identify where we can install some best management practices to improve that water quality in the Indiana portion. Our cost share breakdown, Build Indiana funds total 31% of our request. The other contributions are from federal, and that's 9%. 56% of these 6 projects is paid for with local money, and another, the remaining 4% is with other funds. All of our projects are part of national objectives to reduce flood damages and improve water quality in the Lake Erie Basin and strive for resiliency. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and open for any questions.
Questions?
I have one question. Build Indiana Fund, where's this? I thought that was gone. I don't like it when it gets quiet when you ask about numbers.
It's not, yeah, it's not.
Representative Moses offered the bill that made the legislator directive capital projects not part of that anymore. It is still a fund that lottery dollars go into, but it is not directed capital projects by the legislature.
Who's it directed by?
Usually administration, and there's dedicated places where it goes.
Okay, so this is all dedicated revenue for.
You know what, Zach can probably answer that question.
I can clarify a little bit. There's, so the lottery puts in about $250 million into the Build Indiana Fund every year. 200, by law, 236.4 of that goes towards motor vehicle excise tax relief. So kind of buying down what Hoosiers would otherwise pay at the license branches. The remaining 14 million or so goes primarily to school, library, internet connectivity type things, a lot of IT type things. The David Ford grants are paid out of there, I believe, and then the river basins get some money out of there as well.
And who administers those funds?
The General Assembly is the one that makes the appropriations out of there. The fund exists in law underneath the budget agency, so we are the ones that are releasing those dollars. But I think every dollar of there, other than the motor vehicle excise tax release, has to go to budget committee before it gets released. So this body sees every dollar that goes out.
So we've got 14, just so I get my bearings correct, we've got $14 million on a biennial budget to spend on projects like this.
14 million every year.
Every year, so 28 million. Okay. All right. Good to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Family and Social Services, Jeff Babb.
Good morning. I'm here to present 2 projects for DMHA. The Budget Committee previously approved funding to upgrade Building 417 at Richmond when Public Works brought in a job order contractor. We found that the original bidders had missed items. I'm sorry? Oh, I wasn't speaking into the microphone. Sorry. The first project's for Richmond State Hospital. The Budget Committee previously approved 2 projects to upgrade Building 417. When Public Works brought in a contractor, we found out we were short on funding to make this building occupiable. It will be a substance abuse facility. It's a standalone, and we believe this will cover every contingency remaining.
Yeah, he went to Richmond instead of Madison first, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, the sheet they give me says Richmond first.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
So any questions on the Richmond State Hospital? All right, now can we go to Madison?
I'm sorry. We have several buildings at Madison that needs to be demolished. We're requesting to take down about 61,000 square feet of buildings. There's been vandalism. There's been one arson incident in one of the vacant buildings. We still have a couple others that we'll have to ask for the next biennium, but this is a great start to clear up the facility.
On the Madison Hospital. All right.
Are we
Thank
clear on
you.
the, are we clear on the Richmond?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Next, School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, Jim Durst.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present today. This is Todd Malone, our maintenance supervisor at the School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Todd?
Good morning. We're requesting capital dollars in the amount of $334,412 to be used for the removal of 2 above-ground fuel storage tanks and 2 underground fuel storage tanks, to be replaced with 1 single compartment above-ground storage tank and 1 split compartment above-ground storage tank, to be located in a central location. The tanks are between 30 and 50 years old and are showing signs of significant corrosion and are in danger of developing leaks. We feel that the failing to address this now could lead to a significant event that that could be extremely damaging to the environment and the community, potentially posing a risk to the safety of the students, staff, and visitors, and could present a substantial financial difficulties for the school and the state. Any questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. I can understand the tank for the generator, but our company pulled our pumps and went to a fleet card system and saved quite a bit of money. Plus, it's better for the environment. So have you guys thought about doing that instead of putting in another
We
pump?
currently, the vast majority of our cars, we use the Wix cards throughout the state when we travel
And
around.
that's what we use. That's what I was asking.
Yes, we do as well. But we also have a number of local trips that we make with students. Our gas capacity at the school, we used about 5,000 gallons last year. And we also have a number of pieces of equipment that use gas that wouldn't allow us to, go to local areas. So we'd have to have a certain amount of gasoline storage.
All right, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Dudich?
Jim, just to expand on Chairman Mishler's question, you buy that fuel in bulk, which is typically and use it as necessary, but that could last you for a long time. I know there's a gas station not too far down from the facility, but that allows you a little bit more flexibility. You are buying that up front in bulk off of
We
a
save
state
about
QPM.
10 to 15% by buying in bulk. And we are also decreasing our capacity. Our current tank storage systems total, the 4 of 34,000 gallons, I believe, and we are going to 5,000 gallons between the tanks. So we're significantly reducing the capacity that we have held in the past.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do like soil remediation and all of that stuff when you pull these tanks?
I'm sorry?
Do you have to do like soil remediation and
Yes.
all that
Well,
stuff?
if there's leakage, my understanding is yes, we do. We did have a leak in 1993, and I believe the cost of repair for that repair was about $30,000, a little over $30,000 with
So is
soil.
that part of this number?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have School for the Deaf, Jeremy Hawk.
Good morning. As you heard, my name is Jeremy Hawk. I'm here representing the Indiana School for the Deaf. We have 3 projects before you this morning. The first of which is a renovation for our steam plant and building. The building was built in 1911 and has had no recent renovations. The windows, doors, and one of our boilers are over 50 years old at this point. The scope of the project includes removing those old doors and windows, replacing with new ones, replacing one of our large boilers that was installed in 1965. We would also install a new outdoor brine tank and water softeners for campus use. And along with that, we would replace the de-aerated feed tank and the booster and feed pumps that work with that system. In addition to the steam plant renovation, we are requesting additional funding for a previously approved project, which is HVAC replacement for the south side of our career and technical education building. We were previously approved for $750,000 for this project. Department of Public Works bid out the project, and all bids came back over that price point. So we are requesting an additional $281,930 to complete that project. And finally, we are requesting $1.45 million for window replacement for buildings 1, 2, and 3 on campus. The windows in these buildings are over 40 years old. They're not energy efficient. Seals have begun to leak, and this is allowing outside moisture and air into the buildings, causing mold and mildew. We use these buildings for education purposes, as well as housing State Department of Health offices, as well as Vincennes and Ball State University ASL programs. Open for any questions.
Any questions? You know, I understand the need for these projects, but I mean, I don't think I can emphasize enough that we still really need to work. I know we visited your facilities in one of our previous meetings, but the need to come up with a long-term plan for your 2 campuses. So I think that's something we really need to start moving forward on this year.
And we're open to help in any way we can with that.
Thank you.
Bringing it up again, it's my district, huge piece, in Representative Porter, huge piece of property. I have not been consulted, nor have I been asked of what the good purpose would be. And I just hope in the future that for those of us who represent the district, if you could imagine if we were doing something up in your district or you wanted a best use plan, you would probably want to know what's going on. So before we move down that path, that's a huge piece of exempt property in a community that I represent. And I'd just like to be informed on what's going on going forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Department of Corrections. Kevin? Oh, there he is. I thought I saw him earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. I have 5 projects for the Department of Correction to request your permission on this morning. The first project is an elevator rehabilitation project at the Reception Diagnostic Center in Plainfield. An elevator, due to the nature of our operations, is generally not something we design into our prisons for a number of security reasons. There's Reception Diagnostic Center, where we receive all the adult male felons in the state of Indiana, keep them in a heightened security environment, deliver food up and down on a 3-story cell blocks. These elevators are absolutely critical to the operation. These elevators were installed in 1968 when the building was built. They have not had a major renovation. The elevators are used hundreds and hundreds of times every day. You previously approved this project last fall We went to bid the project this spring. The project came in $39,000 above budget. Our best efforts to get that below budget failed, and this is to approve the project with an additional $40,000. The second project that I have for you is South Bend Community Reentry Center. South Bend is where we help our adult male felons reintegrate back into society. They have, I recently sat through their facility review and then conducted their annual review. One of the things that really struck me as I went through that was the employment rate of those offenders within the community. Those offenders are all actively employed. They have about an 80% employment rate, the other 20% not being where they're ready to go get jobs. But the unemployment rate for those offenders is incredibly low. Of particular note on this project is the $200,000 of the HVAC replacement cost I'm asking for is paid for by those offender wages, returning it right back into the operation of the correctional facility. The facility itself was built in 2001. This project replaces all the rooftop heating and air conditioning units with new high efficiency units and also corrects some engineering failures that they had during the construction of that project. It was a design build project. I won't go into all that, but it was when that facility was constructed, it was outside the oversight of my group or the Department of Public Works. This corrects a number of those problems. Should have a 20 plus 30-year lifespan on the HVAC components. The next project I have is the roofing at our Plainfield facility, 2 separate structures, the South Dorm and the recreation building at that facility. The South Dorm was built in 1972. The roof that's on it today is about 20 years old. It is not a candidate for our restoration as we do on a number of roofs because of its design and installation technique. The second roof, the recreation building, 1964, 31,000 square feet. It has been restored on numerous occasions, and we have used up all the tricks in our hat to repair that roof, and it's time to replace the roof on both of those buildings. The next project is electrified perimeter installation at the Plainfield and Putnamville correctional facilities. These are non-lethal electrified perimeters. You folks that have been on the committee for a number of years have heard numerous projects come before you. These are the last 2 of our adult male facilities of anything above minimum that we have not installed these systems at. Every one across the state of Indiana is completely interoperable. Spare parts are maintained at regional supplies. When we do have a failure, usually they're a result of lightning strike. When we adopted these projects, I came to this committee several years ago. There had been a couple of these systems in place before I began my tenure in my current position, and they had failed. I spent 3 days in Little Rock, Arkansas, trying to defeat one of these systems. I know how they work, and I couldn't get through it without various parts of my body becoming numb. So these systems are absolutely, in my opinion, as a 30-year correctional professional, the best deterrent to offender escape across a physical perimeter fence, discounting the human element. There's human elements at work that as far as security through a sally port or something, but these are absolutely the best systems in the country, in the world, that to keep somebody from climbing a fence and going over it. They are completely non-lethal. They act more of like a taser. They prevent the electrical communication from your brain to your muscles, and you end up laying on the ground for a period of time, and you don't tend to escape too much after you come in contact with the fence. So I would answer any questions. There's been a lot of questions on these in the past. I'd be happy to answer any questions about these and the other projects as well.
Senator Taylor?
Just quite candid, that sounds kind of brutal to me. I know you've talked it down a little bit, but I mean, I've seen taser activity. Just so I understand, these will be turned on and turned off, right?
No, sir. Once they go live, they are live until we do maintenance. It's a very passive system. So you come up to the perimeter fence. The clear zone at one of our prisons is a 12-12-6-2 perimeter fence. It's a national standard. The fences are 12 feet high, an inner and an outer. This goes on the inner fence. You have a clear zone of 5 feet before you come in contact with the fence. There are warning signs every 6 feet. The fence is electrified. We actually print, publish, and distribute things to the offender population of what this fence is. So you have a 12-foot fence with a 16-foot extension on it. It goes actually 4 foot above the fence of electrified zones that go. Every other wire is a positive and negative wire. You have to come in contact with 2 wires or 1 wire and be grounded before you get the electric shock. So there's a clear zone. And we actually put barriers up so offenders playing softball cannot accidentally come in contact with it. But you have to be trying to climb the fence to come in contact with it. It's not something that is for incidental contact. It's not something that can in any way just be by accident. You have to be climbing the fence to get into this.
So you have to be grounded. You can't have 2 hands and your feet on the ground.
And if you're trying to climb the fence and somehow you get above the ground, then the positive and negative, then you've got enough wires. The entire grid of 38 strands of stainless steel wire, you're going to contact something. Believe me, I tried.
Well, what I'm saying is, I don't understand. I'm not an electrician. I just want to make sure that.
You complete the circuit. If you come in contact as you're trying to climb it, you're going to contact more than one wire.
But if you're on the ground, it won't.
If you're on the ground and you touch the fence, the ground provides that ground, and you complete the circuit and you get the shot. So, without going into the details, I can tell you a number of my staff, not I personally, except during the testing, a number of my staff have come into contact with this, both a conscious decision and accidentally. And they report that none of them have went unconscious, but they report that they really don't want to grab it again. It is a psychological deterrent. It's also a physical deterrent. You physically cannot climb the fence without coming in contact with this.
Well, we have problems with people trying to climb the fence.
Absolutely, sir. So in my career, I've participated in 16 manhunts. The last manhunt, I chased a former Army Ranger over 3 miles through woods in the middle of a rainstorm. That manhunt alone cost the state taxpayers over, and I don't have the needs I used to. That alone, in the outbriefing, I still remember to this day that was $3.8 million for that manhunt 20 years ago. The human cost of those manhunts, not to mention the public safety side of that. This is low-cost insurance, in my humble opinion, for these electrified perimeters. No one can get across one of these perimeters. It is not physically possible. I'll stake my reputation on that.
And visitors are shielded from this.
Absolutely. They have a 12-foot clear zone and a 12-foot fence. There's no way that they can possibly come in contact with it. For grass mowing, when we send folks out to mow grass or even work around the clear zone or apply herbicides onto it, we can turn parts of the fence off. When we do that, it's heightened security. The fence interfaces with a video surveillance system. If you come in contact, even if you approach the fence without coming into contact with it, if you approach the fence, it emits a magnetic field. If you break that magnetic field with a human body, depending on the moisture and a bunch of other stuff going on that day, but somewhere between 6 inches and 2 or 3 feet, alarm sounds, video cameras start swinging to the zone, the particular zone, and then it becomes an active deterrent after that. So it's a passive deterrent for the psychological value. It is absolutely an active deterrent with the non-lethal electrified shock.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like what invisible fence you put up for your dog, which does. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. It's a shock. It's a shock. So.
Any other questions? Senator Brown.
I'm just curious, so you're going to reposition so 32 officers right now, I assume, are standing, guns ready on the fences?
In towers, ma'am, in the towers.
So you're going to reposition them when the fences go live. So they're going to fill a need in these facilities currently, or are they going to be dispersed through the?
Absolutely, they'll go inside the facilities. And my operational counterparts could talk to you a lot more on the issues we're having now recruiting and retaining in this economy. Trained staff. So we're experiencing some manpower shortages across our agency. The correctional officers are critical to that. The correctional officers are the bread and butter of our operation. Without what we do every day, without the correctional officer, running the cell house, turning the lock, watching the offender, that is absolutely where the rubber meets the road in our operations. If we can take these correctional officers out of a tower where they're sitting for 12 hours a day, put them in a dorm with offender contact and provide better human security, that's what my operations counterpart plans are. And I engaged them. We gave the budget agency a very well thought out plan on how to do that. As correctional practitioners, we sat down and we looked at that plan at length of what do we really want to shut down, what does this fence, but this fence is so effective that it eliminates the need for that correctional officer in a tower with a rifle 24/7. It eliminates that need. That's one of the, I'm as close to a correctional dinosaur as you're going to find in the state of Indiana, and that was one of the biggest things you had to convince me in my mind. 3 days in Little Rock, Arkansas, about a decade ago, convinced me of that, and I come back, and the prison wardens all looked at me like I'd lost my mind. And until I built a mock-up of it and I showed them. And so that's how we're able to reduce that staffing and move them back inside. And will it make a huge difference in these facilities, 32 officers? I think, and please don't quote me, but I believe each of those facilities are running about 100 staff short.
Well, that was my question. So you're not.
We're not deleting no one's going to get fired or anything like that.
No, I knew that. I mean, that's what I was just wondering, you're not adding, I mean, there's a need there already in your facilities, and even this 32 being repositioned will not fill.
No. Strategically repositioning those staff members inside where they can have offender contact.
All right, thank you.
The management. The last project that I have, if there's no more questions on the electrified perimeters, the last project is a very simple roof replacement at the Pendleton Correctional Facility, a 22,000 square foot roof built in 1990. It is where all food, and I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, we do have some leakage. We try and catch these roofs before they start leaking. This one actually has started leaking recently. We had some pretty extreme rain in that area and some pretty extreme winds this spring. So this project was moved up. Normally this would have been a next spring project, and we're advancing it to this fall so we can be ready for the roofing season.
Absolutely, Senator.
All right. How many escapees have we had in the last 5 years out of that facility?
Sir, I would be happy at these facilities. So I started my career at Putnamville Correctional Facility. That I can speak on. I've led in another part of my career many years ago. I can tell you the last escape at the last escape attempt at the Plainfield Correctional Facility ended up with a fellow being shot on the fence. It would have happened in about 1993 or 4. Okay. We have done a lot of things. We've gotten, and once again, I don't want to say the correctional dinosaur thing too often, but we've gotten really, really smart at how we do perimeter security. So it's not what it was 30 years ago when I started. We've gotten a lot smarter, a lot more robust, a lot more systems, a lot better human security.
Right.
So have we had the last escape attempt at Putnamville would have been probably 6 years ago. And I do believe that 1993, 1994 was the last escape at Plainfield Correctional Facility. But those are both adult male facilities. That is the ones where we have a high density of adult male felons. A lot of them, that is where we have our high potentials for escape.
And this fencing would go around all the correctional?
The entire facility.
Both of them?
Yeah, we do the exterior. Each of these facilities, the Plainfield Correctional Facility is about 2 miles. Putnamville, it's very flat.
Isn't Putnamville a class 1?
No, sir. It is it's a medium security facility.
Medium security.
Medium security. It is.
So we're gonna put okay. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, not a question, but just a comment. One, appreciate the department's focus on trying to find efficient ways of managing the prisons and trying to stay within budgets. Obviously, we've asked you to have management reserves in the past, and I think this is one way where a one-time investment with ongoing maintenance can help reshift and reallocate staff into other areas where there are needs. The second thing, and I know probably many people know this, but not only does Kevin have the expertise with the Department of Corrections, but he also helps us with that expertise in his background in other areas like the Law Enforcement Academy, State Police, and other areas. So while Kevin is also helping the state out with correctional capital issues, he has lent us his expertise as well to help with many other capital areas as well. So one, I just want to acknowledge Kevin, thank you for that help in other areas, and to appreciate the department's efforts and Commissioner Carter's efforts to try to find ways to operate the department and its facilities as efficient as possible.
I appreciate the partnership and support, sir, and it's absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator
About
Taylor.
efficiency? Is that what this is about? The $2.6 million? This is about?
I said efficiency.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure it out, because if I just did simple math, I mean, moving 32 people inside, the time to pay this back, this $2.6 million that we're investing here is a pretty long time.
There's a lot of high turnover at Department of Corrections. We've been working with the commissioner on pay to make sure that we have a good amount of pay for those correctional officers, but wherever we can find opportunities to make sure that we have correctional officers stay at those facilities because of their institutional knowledge, we do that. I think this is one way that we can allocate those correctional officers in areas where there might be some need to reduce overtime, as well as maybe have some folks stay there a little bit longer that might go elsewhere.
Okay. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next we have the university projects. We'll start with Indiana and Dr. Tom Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Budget Committee. My pleasure to be with you again. I have, on behalf of Indiana University, 4 projects for you today on 4 different campuses. I'm almost certain that none of the scopes involve electrified perimeter fencing for any of our students, and gladly so. The first one is on the Northwest campus in Gary. This is a release of funds for our regional campus R&R. It was part of the 2017 state budget cash appropriation for the second year of the biennium. This is the request to release those funds. It is for the renovation of the Anderson Library, mostly mechanical and utility systems within that building. It is the largest building on the Northwest campus. This is the first phase of renovation with that building. Be happy to answer any questions on this one. Okay. Second project is on the IUPUI campus, and this is an exciting partnership that we hope will save for the long term a treasure in the Indianapolis community. This is for the renovation and lease of the Madam Walker Theater on Indiana Avenue, adjacent to the IUPUI campus. For those of you who know history, know that Madam C.J. Walker was one of the first millionaire entrepreneurs in the United States, and came from Indianapolis, and African American woman of great esteem. And the Madam C.J. Walker Theater, named in her honor, was located right on Indiana Avenue, and it was the cultural home for jazz in the African American community back in the early part of the 1900s. The building, over time, has fallen into disrepair, badly needs renovation, and so in a partnership with the Madam C.J. Walker Board and the university and the Lilly Endowment, the university is, and what we think is a win-win scenario, is that the university will assume the management and operation of the theater building, and will accept a grant from the Lilly Endowment of $15 million to fully renovate the building and bring it back to its prime form. The building is largely a performance theater building, has about 1,000-seat performance venue in the building, as well as a large ballroom and then some offices as well. The university will be responsible for renovating it with the grant and then operating it in the long term. We will do a ground lease with the Walker Board in order to keep the ground in the hands of the Walker. The university will be responsible for long-term R&R. I know it was asked the question as to whether that would be the state's responsibility. No, it would not be at this point in time unless the building were to become academic. We feel good about the relationship between the university and the Walker. in that the university maintains right now 2 positions on the Walker Board, and there's been a great dialogue between us in terms of the future use. The future use will involve, one of the things about the partnership is the ability to bring jazz back to the Avenue. And with the Jacobs School of Music, one of the best music schools in the country, we feel that is a great opportunity to bring that forward. Also, the benefit of the university, this is a type of building that we don't have on the campus. We don't have a performing arts center on the campus. So in a sense, we're getting a new building for free, and with the cost being the operating costs of the building. Complex relationship with with all the partners, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Didich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, you mentioned if the facility became academic, it would be in the R&R or could be potentially in the R&R formula. I know there are going to be classrooms there, and obviously it will be overseen by IU, but classrooms tend to make me think academic, or at some point the facility could be considered academic in total. Where is that line that you might draw in terms of when it becomes totally academic versus a public and community facility versus an academic facility?
We still see it as more community-based. While it'll have the opportunity for students to work in community programs, the classrooms themselves would be more about community activity rather than formal classroom activity. The offices will more than likely be occupied by faculty, but the faculty will be serving a community use.
Okay.
Should that flip at any one time, then we'd report that to the state as well.
Okay, thank you, Tom, appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Brown?
And how long is the lease for initially?
We haven't finalized the lease yet, but I would assume that it's going to be in the 30 to 35 year range.
Okay, and then extending the lease to 5-year options and
Right.
or that seems
Correct.
to be...
There'll be options included, mutual options. That would be our intent.
Okay.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. Just a quick comment, thank you, and we're very excited about this potential relationship we will have in our community to hold on to a place that is on the National Register. Madam C.J. Walker was the first African-American millionaire in these United States, self-made millionaire. When we talk about, you used the word academic as a ground lease. Could you unpack the term ground lease for me, please?
Sure. All of the property on that corner right now is owned by the Walker, and I mean the Walker Board when I say the Walker. Because it is on the National Historic Register and the Walker wanted to maintain the ownership of that land, essentially, if you could think about it, the Walker will own the land and the university will own and operate the building during that time of the lease.
Okay, yes, Dr. Morrison, let me echo Representative Porter's appreciation for IU willing to step up here. The $14.9 million is not from IU or it's not from the state, correct?
No, not at all. That is total 100% philanthropy as a grant from the Lilly Endowment, and we appreciate their support as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that very clear to the Budget Committee that this is not a state appropriation, and this is philanthropic. The second piece is you're going to manage it. What is my concern, and just may be a concern, what is going to be the community's ability to utilize that building? If you were to go in, well, I'm sure you've been in there, there are a lot of small business, kind of incubator businesses in there, as well as, for example, for those on the Budget Committee who've ever attended the Black Caucus cultural event where we have a DJ over to Madam Walker. That's the facility we're talking about. That's something that we do traditionally as well. So I was just wondering, what is going to be the mix or the kind of the mission of IU when they take over maintenance and R&R on that building? I want to make sure it stays in the community.
Yeah, let me expand on that. We intend to operate the building as an auxiliary, almost like anything like a campus center. So the building, in terms of the performing arts side or the ballroom, you could imagine those being rentable spaces.
Gotcha.
And in order to fund activity. So we still see those as revenue producing, just as we do any campus center or the union buildings that we have, the student unions. Having said that, we also know that we want a prime focus of the building to be community engagement. And so there are going to be after-school activities and things like that that the community may not see as a rental, if you will, but within the IU system it will be. So within our budgeting system, academic units pay for space. And
Gotcha.
so they may have a grant to do community programming. They may pay the university for the space through that grant, but the end user doesn't see that.
Gotcha.
And so, but it is intended to be a community activity. And let me sidebar that we would love to have the Black Caucus event back there after we renovate.
Get the air conditioning fixed, it might happen.
Any other questions? Senator Brown.
So it says an approximately 30-year lease, and you're going to have 5-year extensions. Is that going to be mutually agreeable? So the Madam Walker Board could also
Correct.
say, thanks, but no thanks?
That is correct.
Okay.
They could.
And then does this, I assume the about $15 million gift, is that just paying for renovations, or is it endowing any maintenance as it goes
That is
forward?
strictly renovations, and so therefore we know that the long-term renovation will be the responsibility of the university. So as future things come up, and you know, we always have to recognize on our end that it starts as an old building, it will always be an old building, and so that we'll have things come up, but we understand that is the same as any other academic building or administrative building that we have.
But you don't own it, but you're saying in the 30-year lease, you are going to assume all responsibility for maintenance, not the Madam Walker?
That is correct, because we will fully operate the building. And so
So then any revenues go to you?
any
decisions
revenues
on
come to the
space?
university as well.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Third project is on the Kokomo campus. This is for a new student activities and events center on the Kokomo campus. If you are familiar, several years ago, you approved a similar facility for the IU East campus in Richmond. If you want to think of this as a small gymnasium activity center building that the campus does not have at this point. Right now, the Kokomo campus rents an old high school gymnasium in downtown Kokomo. One of the things that has changed over time is that the regional campuses are offering more athletic programs. And so you take those programs plus the need for a single space for all students to gather on a regional campus site, and as well for students to have intramural activities and things like that on the campus. And so this is small gymnasium with associated space, $8.4 million coming from campus funds. The campus is also working on philanthropy, as we did in Richmond. These are very, very popular facilities. The student body unanimously supported moving forward on this one. $8.4 million, starting as university funds. Happy to answer any questions.
Representative Brown.
Thank you. Does the IU Kokomo campus have a good agreement with translation of classes from Ivy Tech Kokomo over to IU?
I believe we do across the board, yeah.
Would it be in your interest to talk to the people at Ivy Tech to consider those students also paying maybe a small fee and could access some of the student center activities on your campus
Absolutely.
as opposed to having redundancy in such close proximity?
I know Ivy Tech has a growing athletic program, but no, we'd be happy to. We've done that in Richmond as well. Richmond, as you know, Ivy Tech is on the same track of property.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, in terms of the operating funds, I know in past life and in previous discussions, there have been policies that campuses build up dollars to do a specific project with the intent of
Right.
so there's a very purposeful way of doing this. operating funds can be a mix of state dollars as well as tuition dollars. Just want to make sure the committee understands what operating funds mean, especially with some of the regional campuses that have a greater mix of in-state students and probably a little bit more state money than probably tuition. But just explain for us that operating funds.
Correct. So this building, in terms of its operation, would be a responsibility of the campus, and so that bill on a regional campus falls more to the students, and to the portion of its budget that comes from the state is higher. So yes, it would that square footage cost would fall to the campus.
But in terms of the dollars coming out of the operating, this is cash coming out of the operating fund
Right.
with on the campus, which can be a mixture of those dollars.
Ye-
There was
yeah.
a policy to build that
Yeah,
up
I-
over
yeah, I
time.
s-
Sorry, I
see-
didn't
I
ask
s-
it well.
No, I
sorry.
see your question. And so yes, so this is what campuses do, particularly on the regional campuses, is when they have a long-term need like this, they will start to build up almost a reserve, knowing that they're going to go forth and do something like this. And that's what the Kokomo campus has done. And those funds do come from a variety of sources. It's everything from student funds. That's one of the reasons that we seek student support on projects like this, because a large portion of this money is coming from students. It's not charged to them that way, but we want to be very transparent and let them know and let them have a voice in that and how we're going to spend it. This was one that we had started on a path of needing a bigger space for gathering space on the campus. There was a big courtyard in the middle of the main building that we were going to roof over as an addition to that building to serve this purpose. In the meantime, the athletic programs grew, and so we decided to do it as more of a gymnasium site as opposed to in the main building. So this has been on the docket for the campus for a long time.
Any other questions?
And then the last project is, for IU, is at the Bloomington campus. This is a new housing facility, a new dining facility, large-scale project, long in our long-term housing and master plans on the north edge of campus. For those of you that know the IU Bloomington campus, this will be built just immediately west of the McNutt complex, just south of Assembly Hall. And so this would be for 700 beds, and then also an adjacent dining facility. And the dining facility will be a hub facility that will serve about 4,000 students on this end of the campus. Any more on fully residential campuses like the Bloomington campus, dining occurs on a regional basis as opposed to every residence hall having its own dining facility. So they all gravitate towards one hub. This would be that one hub. This will allow us to build these beds with the potential of opening for the 2020-21 school year, and then after that allow us to demolish some housing that has been long part of our plan as well. So the net increase after we get through the entire plan is an increase of a couple of hundred beds to our inventory. We house on the campus about 13,000 students on the campus, and so that roughly ends up being about 30%. And that number does largely stay the same or within that band. So this allows us to build new facilities and upgrade those facilities, but at the same time take some down, which is our overall goal as well. The division in this project is about $70 million for the housing piece, about $29 million for the dining piece. The dining piece by square footage far more expensive than the housing piece. All funds coming from housing and dining funds on the Bloomington campus. Happy to answer any questions on this one.
Senator Tallien.
It wouldn't be a budget committee if I didn't get to ask you questions. I saw this number and nearly fell over. And here's my concern, and I want you to help me figure out why I'm thinking about this the wrong way. So we have kids going to school all the time who are taking out student loans and end up in a lot of debt. And a lot of their student loans are not only for tuition, but they're also for room and board. To build a $100 million facility that is coming out of student room and board fees,
Right.
has to add to their cost of going to school. What, you know, what realistically are we adding to a student's debt by building facilities like this?
Good question, and one that I've had the chance to answer many times for our Board of Trustees, too. So it's not
okay.
not an uncommon question. Because everybody who is in a regulatory role is and should be concerned about costs for students. Housing is, if properly managed, is something that we at IU and the other institutions as well that have it, look at it in the very, very long term. So you know that you're going to have to replace housing over time. And so you work towards every year putting money away and putting money aside and have debt falling off in order to fund those long-term needs. So that one of the natural reactions is that there's no doubt it's a big number. But also, given the inventory that we have, our housing on the Bloomington campus probably has a replacement value of close to $2 billion. And so we plan for that renewal all the time. And so when you look at a housing rate, that is already built in. So you're going to see a housing rate every year that goes up inflation or less. It's been going up less over the last few years. And so we don't see it impacting the housing rate as much. Now, if we didn't do it, then we have the problem of substandard housing, and students react to that as well. One of the things that our board has been very strong about in recent years is not building Taj Mahals. And there was a trend not too long ago that students and their families wanted, and there's no doubt we could rent them. They wanted private rooms and private baths and things like that. And our board actually pushed back a bit and said, you know, there's nothing wrong with the dual loaded corridor and the restrooms down the hall kind of an arrangement. And that is more of what we've been doing. That's what this will be. And in order to keep the cost of that unit down. There's no question we could sell the higher end pieces of that. One of the pieces of feedback that we were also then getting from parents was that my child is not having the opportunity to interact with other students because they're in their private room. And so therefore we have turned the corner in that, and we think that also keeps cost a bit low.
So let me just ask, I remember sending my child to college and knowing that the cost of room and board was more than tuition, substantially more than tuition. And so how does your cost for room and board at IU compared with other Indiana institutions?
On average, it's about the same. And so in terms of, you know, you can pay higher or you can pay lower depending on what type of facility you're going to live in. But on average, we're all in the same band. And I would tell you that in terms of room and board cost to tuition cost for an in-state student, those are roughly the same. They're roughly in the $10,000 range.
All right, now you said that you've got debt being retired. Is there other debt coming off that's going to?
I'd have to look at the exact schedule, but my assumption is within the life of this, we'll have debt falling off, and this will be new debt.
Okay. And how many units are you going to retire? I mean, to get rid of?
We can project right now demolishing an entire complex, what is the old Ashton complex, of about 560 beds that would come down, and as well what we call BBH&N, which is an apartment complex that is in bad shape, that is about north of 200 beds. So it's almost an even swap.
Oh, so you're not even adding?
No, the long-term plan over a decade has us adding probably about 200 or 300 beds, but it's large. It winds up being very close to being the same.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Brown.
you very much. So it's a swap. Are you including the cost of demoing? That's not in this, is it?
No, that'd be in a future capital project, the cost of the demolition on that site.
Do you require your students to live on campus?
We do as freshmen. We do require freshmen to live on the Bloomington campus, and with very few exceptions. Exception can be that if a student is from the local Bloomington area, they can live at home.
And then for this new dorm that's being built, is it open to all of the students at
Yes.
IU?
Yeah.
And so you said you're about the same range. When you were talking about that, you meant with other university systems in the state for room and board?
Yeah, on average, yeah.
So I don't know how you put it. Did you say your housing rate has gone up with inflation over the past month? Has your tuition rate also gone up with inflation?
Less than inflation.
So, but you haven't kept it flat, your tuition rate?
No, but we've been in the last several years, 1%, 1 point something. We've been in and we did go flat, I think 2 years within that span as well. We were at 0. So we've been very low, and that's the marketplace. That's been the marketplace. Say we can't afford big tuition increases. So while I'll give you there's a media effect here. Time somebody talks about college tuition, of it growing leaps and bounds. There was a time, absolutely, that was true. It hasn't been in the last decade.
Have your student fees gone up every year as well?
Since Mitch has been there? We only classify it as tuition and fee. It's all one number.
So, but you have a tuition number, you
Right.
have a room and board number.
Right.
Right, and then the students usually have to pay fees. For
It-
example, using the Kokomo facility.
It's all included in the tuition number.
You don't break it out?
No, we don't.
So if someone's receiving,
We can't, we do for budgeting purposes, we can tell everybody where the money goes, but we don't charge a separate student fee.
so then
There are,
when,
and I just want to be totally transparent. There are student fees that students in particular majors will pay. If you're in a chemistry,
right,
you might pay a lab equipment fee or something like that, but not a specific student fee that some universities charge to all students. We don't have that.
so that's kind of interesting, because if you get a scholarship and it just covers tuition, typically that was just your classroom, so to speak. But you add in all the fees, so all of those recreational activity things,
Right.
they're all considered now in
It's
tuition.
all in that one figure.
Does this, have you calculated the R&R and operating costs for this $70 million dorm?
We do, and the R&R cost is also built into that housing budget that I was talking about before in the long term. So we are always trying to invest at least about 1.25% of the replacement value annually in R&R. So we build that into the system.
Okay, and one last question. Do you calculate out what it costs for a student to eat and sleep on campus, and how it comes out in terms of what it actually costs? And I mean, a lot of places, a student living on campus is actually a revenue raiser for the school.
It's not a revenue raiser. It is, one of the ways I describe student housing and dining is, at least at a public institution like ours, it is the closest thing to the market we have. Because we are charging market rate, we're having to buy food at market cost, we're having to renew facilities at market construction costs. It is its own self-contained unit. We do not cross boundaries budgetarily between housing and the academic side of the institution at all.
Thank you.
Senator Taylor?
Thank you, Tom. One thing that are you gonna actually demolish Ashton?
Yes.
So what are you gonna do? Okay, you just renovated McNutt, right, in Briscoe?
Briscoe, yes. McNutt has another phase coming, but.
Right,
yes.
so if I'm looking geographically at where you're gonna be, you take down Ashton, which is single units, right? Those are all singles.
No, Ashton is double-loaded corridors. Ashton is the one that is on 10th Street, just east of Teeter and Wright. I don't know,
Okay, so it really, you're not, okay.
it's
which
a
is-
small,
Right.
it's old dorm complex.
Right.
That's, I don't know if I'm gonna talk
I
about
do
you.
know- I
You know
do
where
know.
Lenny's is? It's
Right.
right across the street.
Okay, so you're gonna build something onto McNutt, that's a
Right.
dining, and then next to that, you're gonna build some housing,
Correct.
which is where Dunn Meadows used to be.
It's not Dunmet, it is, it is
Not
adjacent
Dun-
to where all the football tailgating is.
Yeah,
It's
you-
right adjacent to there.
You're taking away all our tailgating spots, but anyway. So that's gonna be 70 million of it is housing, 29 million dining. One of the things that I noticed from being down there recently is that there's a campus-wide meal plan that all the students can use. They can go anywhere on campus. So this is actually gonna provide them with another place to eat on that north side of campus, which is not there already.
There is one there now, but it's not big enough, and so
That's
after
what
we
I-
build this one, we will likely repurpose that dining hall
Okay.
as either a convenience store or something like that.
All right, two more questions. One is, right down the street on 17th Street, I understand that someone purchased Dunhill Apartments for about $13 million, and that they are building 2 and 3 bedroom units for rent. And just so everybody knows, 'cause I brought this up last year when we were having a debate about market rate, they are gonna be renting those for almost $2,000 a month. What is the room and board, which is actually food, cost charged to the student per month at IU?
If you divided it out by month, it's roughly about $1,000 a month, probably less, room and board, so, and dining.
I'm trying to make a point.
I understand.
In Bloomington, the market for apartments is about approximately $700 per person. 7 or 8, actually. And these are not the best types of units. This development is just going on down the street. And I bring that up because the room and board that IU is charging is market rate. It is actually below market rate. Now, if you get some good roommates, you get 6 roommates, you might be able to save some money on food, but then you gotta have 6 people. But I just wanna make sure that people understand that. That's why I thought it was important last year that we didn't pass that bill that would have allowed Bloomington to restrict some of their housing to affordability, because what it's doing is it's curving the market, and the people who work in Bloomington can't afford units. It's just that simple. The last piece, you're gonna do this in free, is this gonna be, this is not your certificate program, this is a bond issue, right?
It's a bond issue, yeah.
Thank you. All right. You're good. All right. So this is gonna be a 25-year payback, just so everybody understands,
Right.
through fee replacements, and you've got debt rolling off of your certificates over time, so.
Yeah, this is not certificates of participation, this is revenue bonds.
But revenue bonds.
Revenue
But my
bonds.
point, exactly. So it's the revenue that you generate from this
Absolutely.
project that you're
Right.
gonna use.
You
Okay.
got it, right.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Next, Purdue, Tony Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Tony Hahn with Purdue University. I have 2 items for your consideration today. The first is a renovation at the Breeze Student Athlete Academic Center on the first floor. This is about 10,300 gross square feet that was recently vacated by the football operations group as they moved into their new facility that opened last year, the Player Performance Center that was approved several years ago. And this will transform that formerly football operations space into an athletics academic support facility for all student athletes in every sport. And different types of spaces will be available: one-on-one tutoring, group study, individual study, and it will give our Vanguard program for those with a certified learning disability. It'll give them a permanent home in the renovated space. The cost of the project is $2.7 million, and it's funded 100% from gift funds.
Tony, just an assumption, since it's going to be called the Breeze Center, I'm assuming the gift funds are probably coming from a gentleman named Breeze?
You know, I checked to see if he was available, if the namesake was available to present, but he's,
Oh,
No,
I thought
he-
that was Trent Green, I'm sorry.
the Drew and Brittany Green, or Breeze donated,
Green, oh,
donated some money for the renovation several years ago when this was the football hub.
Gotcha.
Any other questions?
Actually,
Next,
do
I
have-
have,
Senator Brown.
I actually do have a question.
oh, yes, sorry,
Thank
Senator.
you. Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you have this, you had these services, I assume, before, but they weren't in a space, is that it? The
They were
Vanguard and-
decentralized, right, and this will add space to these services. These services are available to, in that kind of Breeze and Mollenkoff area in the athletic side of campus, to the student athletes, because that's where they are for most of the day, be it practice, team meetings, workouts, they have dining facilities there. So to have those support facilities even more concentrated in a big open space will be beneficial to all the student athletes.
How many student athletes do you have?
We have over 600 student athletes total in a variety of sports.
And are some required to use these programs as opposed to making it optional to them?
Well, that's an excellent question. I mentioned the Vanguard program earlier. That's a signature program we have for anyone that has a documented learning disability, and that's some intensive one-on-one assistance that is required. Much of this is group study and individual or peer tutoring, so it makes the space available. And I don't know about, I can't answer whether it's mandatory for them to use.
For the other students?
But I also know that they have to be academically eligible to compete. And the athlete's average GPA, I believe last year was 3.08, which is very close to the all-campus.
That's impressive, and this Vanguard program is impressive. How long have you been?
Oh, that's been
running?
several years, but it's never had a permanent home, and that's what will create a permanent home. It's kind of moved around and been kind of disaggregated. I think we'll be able to grow it and concentrate more once it has a permanent home.
All right, thank you.
Any questions? All right, next.
Next, I have for you a lease of space in our Discovery Park District, which is on the West Lafayette campus. Just for way of background, the Discovery Park District is the 450 acres to the west of our West Lafayette campus that's owned by the Research Foundation. And we announced in 2016 a major development between PRF and Browning to develop this area, this 450 acres over the next 20 to 30 years, to make it a living, learning, working destination with educational and economic and cultural opportunities. This Convergence building is the second major investment in the Discovery Park District, and Convergence is appropriately named because this will be the meeting point for companies and corporations that want to work more closely with the university. And this request is for the university to lease 30,000 square feet in this building. The total building is 150,000 square feet. We would move programs like our Center for Corporate and Global Partnerships and sponsored programs, as well as our Engineering Research Center and our Digital Education Group, as well as the Foundry. And I know this group toured the Foundry, which is our incubator, a couple years ago, and since its inception, it's launched over 165 different startups over the past 3.5 years. So we would move all of that to the Convergence building, where it would be a hub to work with other companies that we're attracting to be tenants there. We have a focus on life science, ag, aerospace, and manufacturing for the other tenants. The lease would be for 30,000 square feet at approximately $570,000 a year, which is about $19 a square foot, which is pretty close to market rate there for this kind of administrative space. We hope that our presence there will serve as an anchor to attract those companies that want to work closely in the commercialization and partnership space.
Questions? Senator Brown.
I had a chance to tour the Global Institute, so that was wonderful. So
Good.
thank you at the Anise. But I had a question I meant to ask earlier, so I apologize. I'm going to ask all the universities this, so just to prep them. So has your tuition gone up and/or your room and board, and do you include fees in your tuition?
Our tuition, as we have made a name for, I think, has remained flat for, I think this will be our 6th year, and we've pledged another. So $9,992 is our tuition for a year at West Lafayette. That's all in. So that pays a student activity fee, that pays your academic, that pays an R&R. The large campuses often have an R&R fee. So $9,992. Dining at West Lafayette, housing and dining, has actually decreased. We've kept housing flat, and we've decreased dining twice by 5%. So that's actually less expensive now than it was 6 years ago. So it's been flat for 6 years. We just had a press release this week or the previous. We are now for the most popular option, housing and dining, we are the least expensive in the Big Ten. That was listed probably a week ago for the upcoming year. Our most popular option and meal plan equates to about $9,414 for housing and dining meal plan. And Senator Taylor, to your point, I've looked closely at the market in West Lafayette, and the average one-room apartment there is $938. And that wouldn't include food, utilities, or things like that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Any questions? Oh, Mr. Dudich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony, I'm going to put my old CHE CFO hat on here for a second, so I apologize if I ask a lot. Is the building built?
It is not.
It is not built.
It is not built.
And so, will you vacate space on campus? And what will you do with that space when it's vacated? I know your intent is not to be here long-term, to try to get the building to be occupied. So will that, when folks move back to, will folks move back to campus? How does that work mechanically, logistically, as people leave and come back with your intent not to be there long-term, but to stimulate?
Well, I think the folks who will move out there have a long-term goal of being there. It's a 15-year lease with 2 5-year options to extend. The building could be completed as early as late spring, early summer of 19. So that the folks we would move out there, we would want there for the duration of that lease, the 15 years. It will open up space throughout campus.
Okay.
And some of this space is less than adequate now.
Okay.
And I think we have to take a look at our space management to see what's the best use of some of that older space. Some of it's in buildings that may not be there in the next 10 years. And I think that's part of the plan, to move some of those commercialization opportunities into a central location.
Okay. And then it's up to the PRF to identify future tenants. Nothing that Purdue needs to do to, I know that's, again, the intent is to try to stimulate future tenants, but there's no obligation for Purdue University to identify future tenants. That's all on PRF to fill that additional space.
That's exactly right. The liability for the remaining space then falls on PRF. We're bound to what we've leased, what we're requesting in this lease. Of course, we want to be a part of that, of finding those good companies that already employ our graduates, or that we do research with, or that fit this life science and ag and manufacturing sector that we want to build out there. So we're a part of that conversation in targeting companies, but we're not under the obligation to fill it. PRF is.
Okay, and then one final question. Seeing how these offices are on Purdue's campus now, would you consider the $570,000 a new cost to Purdue to go out and be located in this facility, or are there some savings that you're going to have annually that will help cover the cost of the lease payment?
As my colleague, Dr. Tom, did mention, academic units and offices, they essentially pay for the space that they maintain now. So there's a cost to where they are already. Mm-hmm. And they have budgets distributed from the treasurer's office that pay for central plant and other real estate. And so it's I wouldn't say that it's an all-new cost because they have to pay to be somewhere. But this will be a much more flat rate across the board of $19 a square foot, and they'll be co-located, which I think the synergies alone would be valuable.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Next is Ball State. Becca Pulse.
Good morning. I come to you today to request approval for an $18 million parking garage project, the New York Street parking structure. The current Emmons parking structure is nearly 50 years old and has failing expansion joints. It was built with the precast materials, and so the proposal is to have a slightly larger garage about 300 yards east to open up that core of campus to make more pedestrian friendly in accordance with our campus master plan. So it will have about 600 spaces, 3 floors, 4 parking floors, 3 floors elevator wise, I guess. And so it will be cast in place. We think that will reduce the maintenance costs and help us to open up that center of campus. So with that.
Any questions? Thanks, Becca.
All right, thank you.
Next is Vincent's Phil Rath.
Turn that up a little bit, Becca. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. First, I'd like to say that when we put in our electrified fencing at VU, our retention rates went through the ceiling, and it's very effective. And I also like to say that while I may not look that old, I lived at McNutt 40 years ago, and it needed renovation then. So you're finally there, Tom. But happy to report that VU would like to have the release of $8 million for the renovation of our Learning Resource Center. The building was originally built in '57, has 4 additions to it. It's badly needed for HVAC, which is going to be more than half the cost of this renovation. And we're going to bring that building into today's new technology. And as you know, books are disappearing in libraries now, and it's all about interactive technology. And in addition to that, we have a $4.5 million renovation of our administration building, which was built for $23 a square foot. And it has some structural issues that really need to be dealt with. And both these projects are a cash appropriation. Be happy to answer any questions. And I'm glad to be here. Glad you're here.
Questions for Phil? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next we've got the review items. Yes, sir.
I don't mean to interrupt. Yes, I do. No, I think this would be appropriate to, in June's meeting, you allowed us to have some discussion with Department Administration about the SEIUs and their minority business participation. I just wanted to bring the board up to speed on what has been going on.
I think we need to talk about that when we do discussion items.
Okay, thank you.
So let's do the review items, and then we can open up for discussion items.
Thank you.
Is that all right?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one more question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. I should have asked this question earlier in regards to with Ray in the Indiana State Fair Commission. He used the word renovation in regards to the swine barn. I thought my discussions with them a year ago was building a totally new swine barn. I didn't want people think it was a renovations versus new construction. I may be wrong, but I thought it was a new construction. I thought it was about 45 million at that time. So I don't know. I just wanted a point of clarification, Mr. Chairman.
They are no longer here.
Actually, just taking a recent tour of the swine barn, your point on there, they're going to keep, I think, the facade for historical purposes, but basically it'd be overall new construction.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make that correction on that.
first review item is Indiana Public Broadcasting, Greg Gizzi from South Bend, Indiana.
Good morning, everybody. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I am Greg Gitze. I'm President and General Manager of WNIT, which is the public broadcasting television station in South Bend. But I'm here as a board member of the Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Roger Rhodes, our executive director, who you're familiar with and who usually appears before you, is actually in the retirement process, but because of some health reasons, could not travel and join us. But he passes along his best wishes and appreciation for his work with you over all these years. And he just wishes he could be here. To start, on behalf of the 8 television stations and 9 radio organizations which are across our state, we want to thank you for your long-standing and faithful support of public broadcasting. Public broadcasting stations have always been spendthrift organizations, and I know from the grassroots level that we stretch every dollar we receive from the state with support we get from individuals and corporations and foundations. And most importantly, we don't take your support for granted. So again, I want to say thank you. While all of our public broadcasting entities are independently operated, we share that common purpose of service to citizens of our state. And just to give you kind of a recap of things we've been involved with over this past year, we have been really, everything you could say in public broadcasting comes under 3 general buckets: education, public affairs, and well, we're very involved in the arts and civic engagement. An idea of education, I could start out when I'm in front of a Rotary group or a Kiwanis group. I like to, they introduce me as a president and general manager of WNIT, but I say what I really am, I'm the principal of the largest preschool in our community. And that's one of our strong suits in education, and delivering education services. And I'm very pleased to say that that's recently been backed up by a huge study from Northwestern University that's encompassed 20 years and over 20,000 students. And they have validated the effectiveness of public broadcasting, the educational programs we provide. We're extremely sensitive to what's going on in the state, and the opioid addiction problem has been something that's been hugely on our radar. And we have been tackling that with documentaries and with public events that are continuing the discourse and looking for solutions to find that the problem, or to find the solutions to that problem. And something new, we've been cooperating lately over the past year with federal and Indiana Homeland Security to provide to provide a pilot project of transmission of data, voice, and video for uninterrupted, secure communications for first responders. And this pilot project is around school security events. And you could think of us, and you know, how is TV involved in this? But really think of what we do now as a big data pipeline, a big fire hose. And when you need a lot of data, and especially when you think of cell towers getting jammed and the infrastructure getting bogged down, these huge emergencies, we can turn on that big pipeline and dedicate it to public safety. In our civic engagement, I think you're familiar with all of our debate coverage. We have our statewide programs like Indiana Lawmakers, Indiana Week in Review, State of the State, the State of the Judiciary, the State of Education, and then all of our individual stations do a lot of local programs. Many of you have probably appeared on some of those on the local level. And so for fiscal year 2019, the state has authorized a total distribution of $3,564,750. Well, I'm here to request your approval of that distribution for release. In rounded dollars, about $509,000 is earmarked for the 9 radio members to be shared equally, and roughly $3,055,000 is designated for the 8 TV stations. And this year, we're recommending that once again, we use the same formula that's been used for a number of years to distribute that by market. And finally, we request that distribution be made in 2 payments. The first one, 75% coming yet this month in August, and then the remaining 25% in January of 2019. I believe all committee members have received a letter from Roger Rhodes, which details the amounts proposed for each station and the payment schedule. I have to, just a personal comment, it's my first time observing these proceedings, and I'm pretty impressed on how deep you ladies and gentlemen dig in on this. And so again, I've got to thank you for your support. It's greatly appreciated, especially now that public television and radio stations are entering a new period of technical transitions, and there's going to be lots of opportunities for new areas of service. And I know it's been a long morning for you, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Greg? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I just have to go back to your opening remarks. So with $3 million for across the state in public television, you said that you are the largest provider of preschool education?
It's a quip. I don't think there's any replacement for in-person preschool education. I hope that we find a way that we could send every child to preschool education. But not every child gets to go. We estimate that right now the number might be 20% of all school children get to go to a qualified preschool education program. And so I think we represent, and we're there for the 80% of kids that do not get to go to a qualified program. And plus, when the kids who are going to school come home, we're also there to reinforce some of the lessons they've learned. And our curriculum is very STEM-based, but with a high dose of literacy and social skills interlaced in those entertaining but very educational programs.
So for 80% of the children not going, though, I just want you stand by the curriculum base, if you will, of your programming.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Next, the David C. Ford Technology Program, Candace Dotson.
Good morning. This is my 7th appearance before this committee on behalf of these funds, 7 years. So there's questions earlier about the Build Indiana funds, and I'm very happy to say that I'm very thankful that it is appropriated to fund a lot of digital education and learning that's going on in our schools across Indiana. So first, I am speaking for Senator David C. Ford Educational Technology Program funding, and the Department of Education requests the $3,086,072 from these funds that are appropriated in House Bill 1001 under the David C. Ford Fund for fiscal year 2019. And these funds are used to support the many programs that we use to kind of wrap ourselves around that movement toward digital learning for all of our students and schools in Indiana. Are there any questions for that fund?
Any questions? All right, thank you.
And then second, I am here on behalf of the School and Library Internet Connection Funds. And the Department of Education requests the $3,415,000 from the funds appropriated under the School and Library Internet Connection for fiscal year 2019. And of those appropriations, that amount each year should be used for the schools. And then $1,585,000 each year will be used for libraries. Any questions about the connectivity? Yes.
Senator Brown.
Is this the e-learn? No, is that a different connectivity?
E-learning does come under my offices work.
But that's not with this library. Okay,
No,
so
not the library.
do you, I'm sure you do get feedback, are there schools and libraries that, I hope they're all connected, obviously, but are there those who have issues with connectivity even today?
You know, I belong to some national organizations, and then I know all of us have been working very hard to make sure that all of our schools are connected, and Indiana does a very good job of that. We are not like a lot of states, say Alaska, other places that have that last mile. We've done much better job in getting our schools connected. We've been working, I know, under the governor's direction, a partnership the last couple of years with Education Superhighway and other organizations to make sure schools and libraries are connected. The kind of challenge, I think, is just about everybody has it in the door, if you will get that, but as digital learning continues to grow and opportunities for students to expand and with STEM and computer science, you know, the breadth of that needs to be even deeper. So there's always a need for more funding and more connectivity, but we really, in Indiana, do a very good job of not having too many of those last miles left. But there are a few places where you know, that's still kind of a struggle, and maybe not into our schools, but into the communities surrounding the schools.
Right, I know that, but these are libraries within the schools, right?
Yeah,
Are these,
and then also our other libraries. I don't know if someone's here from the library today. They usually are here with us, but also the public library.
this also funds those, these are not just school libraries. All right, so so once it's in the door, you know, you're giving learning programs and things because maybe everybody's not up to speed. But in terms of the bandwidth and the speed, are you good? Are we good with our public libraries and our,
Well, and I
particularly our
can't speak for the
schools?
public libraries,
Well, then
mostly
just
for
speak
our
to the schools.
And I would say that varies. And I would say that we are in a much better place than many. But we still could use more funding and more opportunities. But we are, with that partnership with Education Superhighway and other groups, working to address individual schools' needs and help them get the right partnerships and working with their communities to make sure that's happening.
All right, thanks.
We have some tech data up on our website, and we have some really up-to-date numbers that you can access. I can make sure you get that data so that you can see exactly school to school and district to district where that is.
Yeah,
I can
that'd
get
be
that to
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Public Mass Transportation, Larry Buckle.
Good morning. Again, my name is Larry Buckle. I'm with the Indiana Department of Transportation, and I'm here to present the Public Mass Transportation Fund. It's PMTF. The fund is to assist public transportation around the state. Indiana has 64 public transit systems around the state. These systems provide fixed route bus service, typically in the urban areas, and demand response service, typically in the rural areas around the state. The allocation that we're going to administer is about $43.6 million. Our allocation method is as follows. Each system receives a base amount, and the base amount is derived from the amount they received in 2014 and 15. It was an average. We created a base. NICD, the Northern Indiana Commutation District, receives 12.34% of the funds off the top, and the remaining amount of funds, which is a little bit over $1 million, is allocated based on performance. The performance measures that we use are they're a ratio based on passenger trips per operating expense, total vehicle miles per operating expense, and what we call locally derived income per operating expense. The funds will be used for calendar year 2019 for our public transit systems. The funds will also match federal funds. Indiana receives about $85 million in federal formula funds from the Federal Transit Administration, so these funds are also used to match and leverage the federal funds. These funds also must be matched by local dollars, so if you receive $1 in a PMTF funds, you have to match it with $1 in local funds. And the funds are paid to the systems on a reimbursement basis. Any questions?
Questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, right, next, we have Indio Biosciences Research Institute, David Johnson and John Lecklider.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to meet with you this morning. I'm John Lecklider. I'm retired chairman and CEO of Eli Lilly and Company and recently appointed board member of the IBRI. Mark Anderson, the IBRI CFO, will share some financial information following my brief remarks, along with a summary of our comprehensive plan. Before I start with a brief reminder of why we created the IBRI, I want to thank you for the state's confidence as demonstrated by the initial $25 million investment in the IBRI and the additional $20 million investment in the current biennium budget. As you are aware, the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute was founded by Indiana's leading life sciences corporations and academic institutions, along with the state of Indiana, to promote increased research collaboration among industry and academia to benefit the Indiana life sciences economy, the economy in general, and the health of the people of this state. Our state of Indiana, with under 7 million people, is one of the largest centers of life sciences activity in the United States. In fact, we're second only to California in terms of life sciences exports. So this is not just about research, we make stuff here. The challenge for Indiana's life sciences industry comes in the need for a larger research bench beyond industry walls. Life sciences research is becoming more and more a team sport, requiring bigger science and more scientists working together. Historically, Indiana's life sciences companies and research universities have not collaborated on any significant scale. In fact, Indiana's research universities have historically excelled in areas other than many of the particular target fields of the life sciences industry in the state. The result is that Indiana's life sciences companies today spend more than $7 billion annually on external R&D, but relatively little of this is spent within the state of Indiana. The IBRI was created and designed to address these challenges and is doing so in the following ways. IBRI is helping to bridge the gap between industry and universities. IBRI is bringing preeminent researchers with whom industry partners will collaborate. The IBRI funding model, with its endowment, is attracting key talent, unlocking the potential for collaboration with industry sponsors. This is due to more grant and sponsored research funding going to actual research rather than to overhead. Preeminent researchers are attracting research funding from sources outside of Indiana. And finally, as the IBRI pursues innovative translational research with particular focus on diabetes, cardiometabolic health, and nutrition, Hoosiers Health stands to benefit. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Mark Anderson for a brief financial update before we field any questions. Thank you again.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want to touch on the financial aspects and then cover the comprehensive plan. The IBRI received $25 million from the state in the first investment. We leveraged that to raise more than $140 million in total funding, and we established the research operations. We anticipate a similar result with the second $20 million investment, which will be used to accelerate our R&D activities. It'll be used to enter into a lease as an anchor tenant in 16 Tech, and it'll be used to catalyze additional philanthropic contributions, just as we did with the first tranche of investment. The distribution of the $20 million is tied to 3 milestones. There's a $5 million milestone tied to a licensing agreement with the state's research universities and in-licensing technologies from those universities. A second $5 million milestone is tied to achieving $5 million in commitments for sponsored research. The first one we've already met. The second one should be an announcement very soon. that we've met that. The final one is a $10 million milestone tied to $10 million in new pledges for private donations. And we're actively underway working on that with a new VP of advancement at the IBRI. If I switch gears then to the strategic plan or the comprehensive plan, which is included in the materials, and as a reference at slide 10, if you're looking at those materials, there's a financial overview. This plan reflects rapid growth in our research operations. It includes a significant ramp up in operating revenues from both grants and sponsored research. And it targets a significant increase in philanthropic contributions over this period of time, which again leverages the state's additional investment. Of note, as requested, and this is included on slide 13 of the printed materials, the IBRI will place the additional $2 million from the state into its endowment and will only use the earnings of those funds in its operations. And in the event of dissolution or discontinuation, the $20 million investment would be returned to the state with priority from any remaining funds of the IBRI. So with that, I know you've received the entire packet of materials, but I'll stop here. Just want to thank the committee and the members for your continued support. We greatly appreciate it for our important mission. And with that, we'll answer any questions you may have.
You know, we met a couple weeks ago, and first of all, I want to thank you for agreeing to put the $20 million in the endowment. I know I shared my concerns, and I felt it was the best way to protect the state's money, and then in the event that, you know, the IBRI is dissolved, that $20 million would revert back to the state. So thank you for agreeing to do that.
Absolutely.
Great.
Senator Taylor?
Porter.
Oh, I thought you were talking to me.
Porter.
Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Porter.
That's okay. I know it's two Gregs.
That's Greg has a question.
That's the reason why I try to go by Gregory.
I just assumed it was Taylor, sorry.
That's the reason why I try to go by Gregory. And thank you, Mr. Anderson, for being here, and seeing Mr. Johnson and Mr. Licklider. And I know that we never did get together prior to this today's events. I do have a couple of questions. My question is because I live in Indianapolis, I've been kind of involved with this on the periphery, and I see with our 16 Tech initiative, I just want to know how this initiative really fits into 16 Tech. It's been going on for a while, and it's just moving really kind of slow. And I know Indiana's thorough, but to me, this is kind of slow in regards to that. That's my first question. I know that you've gotten a lot of land donated by the institutions, a couple of hospitals. How does that fit into this whole development? And also, when are we going to really, you think we'll see a return on our investment, our ROI? How many people have been hired in regards to this? And any of them, I know science is and the technology is important, but what is the opportunity for minorities in this field? And last but not least, the impact of that community, which is just coming into, and the $75 million that the city initially put forth. Utah been around for a while. These are questions that have not been answered. So I know I asked several, but have at it.
All right, I'll try to remember those and respond. And I'll ask some of my colleagues to respond to a few of those as well if I don't cover it adequately. The first one, number of people, there are 35 full-time employees at the IBRI. We had 11 summer interns or high school students. 4 of those were SEED STEM students. So that's kind of where we are. You can see on the financial summary, the total head count over this 5 years, we anticipate increases to 82 by the end of 2022. From a land standpoint, we received land initially at the IBRI. That land has been transferred to 16 Tech, which is a separate entity. So the land and the obligations associated with were transferred from the IBRI to 16 Tech so that 16 Tech can accomplish its purposes of developing that district. So they will now control that land and have the plans. The timing of 16 Tech, we anticipate we're on the verge of entering into a lease for a new building. So we'll be the anchor tenant in a new building in 16 Tech. The timing of that we anticipate is mid-2020 of actually moving into that building. From a diversity standpoint, we are actively focused on doing what we can from a diversity standpoint in our hiring practices. We are only 35 people at this point. I think you'll see the population of the IBRI largely resembles the population of the research community as a whole, but certainly have initiatives to try to increase the diversity as we increase and grow. One of your questions is impact on the local area. We've invited seed STEM students in over the summer. We were late to the game in getting to those students. So as we move forward, we will expand our, we'll move it earlier. We'll move more quickly and try to recruit students from the very near district high schools to us and involve those students in the seed STEM program next year. Please.
I think ultimately your question, Representative Porter, about the return on investment, I think it is something that we're going to have to measure in the longer term. I'm impatient like you are and want to see this have as immediate an impact as we can have, but just to put in perspective today's life sciences economy, 1,700 companies in the state employ 55,000 people with an average salary of more than $90,000 per person. The impact on the Indiana economy of our life sciences industry is $78 billion. So ultimately, we want the IBRI to be a catalyst for the growth of this industry within the state. But I won't stop there, because I think a study that David Johnson commissioned 10 years ago or so from Battelle showed that for every life science job we create in the state, there are, I think, David, 5 other jobs that form around that. Eli Lilly and Company, for example, when I left, we were winning when I left, but when I left, we had 1,100 suppliers from the state of Indiana that supplied our company. So you can see the ripple effect on employment and employment opportunities for people in this state for continuing to essentially nurture one of our crown jewels. And we think the IBRI is an important sort of linchpin in that overall strategy by bringing industry, the state and its interests, and the academic institutions. We've got 3 world-class research institutions in the state, IU, Purdue, and Notre Dame, and they're all at the table in this effort.
Thank you.
Either one, thank you, appreciate it. If and when a next recession hits, is our base of support rather narrow, and what are the next steps to broaden that base of support?
I think our base of support right now is a little bit narrow. It's limited to primarily the state of Indiana. The plan is to grow and expand that, so the first part will be to actually establish the capabilities. As we bring preeminent researchers to the Institute, that will draw funds from outside of Indiana and will expand the base.
Any other questions? Mr. Didich?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo Senator Mishler's comments. I appreciate the flexibility by the IBRI, especially with the putting the dollars in the endowment, as well as a contingency in the event that something different happens. So on behalf of Governor Holcomb, appreciate that flexibility, and the last hour is thinking about that and taking that back to your board. Appreciate that support for the state's investment.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right, thank you very much. Medicaid, Chris Fletcher. I'm going to do his 2 discussion items and then yours.
Good morning, Senator Mishler and members of the committee. My name is Chris Fletcher, and I am the Director of Reimbursement for Indiana Medicaid. I'm here to talk to you about 4 different state plan amendments that we have, and so I'll just step into them, and if you guys have any questions, just let me know. The first one is basically a renewal of our Hoosier Care Connect population waiver. This primarily serves our age-blind disabled population. The only addition to this renewal is basically including hospice under our managed care, which is a new benefit, and that is to essentially allow for continuity of care among our population, or the population that waiver serves. The second one...
Excuse me, Senator Brown has a question.
Oh, my apologies.
I remember having that discussion in committee on hospice. I was just curious, do you have a anticipated cost, what you think that's going to be?
So for this whole renewal, basically what we're looking at is a slight fiscal increase. I think for 19 state fiscal year, you're looking at basically under $100 million, if I'm reading this correctly.
For hospice?
For the inclusion of hospice as a benefit. Before, what would happen is they would basically be carved out, or they would move to a fee-for-service population. And so now what they're doing to ensure a continued continuity of care is they're going to be covered under the Hoosier Care Connect waiver.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Zach?
Correct. Thank you, Zachary.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, because my head exploded for very brief second.
3 zeros there.
The next one is basically a straight renewal of our behavioral primary care coordination waiver. This is a small population that serves approximately 2,000 individuals. There's a slight addition basically where we ensure that the member or their legal guardian gets a copy of the care plan. That was already happening. This is just a way to formalize that. The third state plan amendment is regarding basically a transfer policy. This is basically ensuring that when an individual member is transferred between two hospitals, that the hospitals are compensated appropriately. Basically, currently, the originating hospital receives a per diem, and the receiving hospital receives what they call a DRG, or diagnosis-related group payment. And those are basically based on lengths of stay or estimated lengths of stay. So this is switching everybody to a per diem. It is also a slight savings.
Do you have, and you don't have to give it to me today, but have statistics on how many of this population are being received from out-of-state hospitals, and what the difference is in reimbursement, as well as the number of our patients who may occasionally go out of state for care?
I do not have those statistics with me available, but I can definitely get you those statistics.
Not just the numbers, but the different rates of reimbursement?
Correct.
I assume
because
they're
our out-of-state hospitals are reimbursed under a different, or they do receive a different reimbursement level.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Continue.
Thank you. And the last one is regarding our intensive outpatient peer recovery crisis intervention services. This is basically expanding what traditionally is a service provided under our Medicaid rehabilitation option and expanding that to a full state plan. This will allow more of our members to access the service, basically as long as they meet medical necessity. This is just really another tool in the toolbox of combating the opiate epidemic and the SUD issues that our state faces. And those are basically the summaries I have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last item is the Westlake Corridor. Not discussion, what is it? Review. I forgot what list I was on. Mr. Hanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. We appreciate your time. I'm going to be just straight to the point in the interest of your time. We prepared a presentation for you here. There's a lot of discussion here about economic development attributes, which are very important in terms of the federal rating process. There are two key things to look at here: is the viability of your economic development plan, which you have made very strong with 1144 and value capture, and then the viability of your finance plan. Today, we're here to talk about the review of the Westlake Corridor Expansion Finance Plan. We will be coming back to you at some point here in the near future to do the same thing with the double track plan. As a reminder for some of the non-area members, the Westlake Corridor Expansion is a brand new train line that intersects with the existing South Shore train and ties Central and South Lake County directly to Chicago, Illinois. It's about an 8-mile long project. If we can, with your permission, I would like to skip ahead on our presentation to the 7th slide, which will give you just a recent context for where we've been with the FTA in the process and what's important about today and what we're seeking. Today, what we're asking with your review constitutes the last step that we are required to do with the FTA to meet a standard that they call no further action required. So we've been through the RDA Board of Directors, the NICD and/or South Shore Board of Directors, and the IFA. Your review will accomplish the goal of removing any contingencies from the plan and make us qualified for seeking a project rating on Westlake. With the highest rating that we can get, and this being a competitive finance package, that makes us eligible then for a full funding grant agreement consideration for the federal government, which would then bring the 50% match for the project. So this is important today in order to make us qualified to make the next step. So I'll go to, I don't know, here we go. I'll advance to the 7th slide here. The economic development portion we've discussed many times, the return on investment for the state of Indiana being far in excess of the investment, as well as for the locals, and 6,300 permanent jobs, and short-term 1,000 jobs for construction. The recent history that's important for today's discussion is that we submitted applications for both the double track and Westlake projects in 2017 in the fall and September. We then started this process of receiving feedback from the federal government on the status of the projects and further action required in order to meet FTA thresholds and to have competitive submission for consideration for funding. We then in the meantime, took additional steps through you to strengthen the viability of the finance plan in the market through House Enrolled Act 1374, the creation of access to mechanisms to support grant anticipation notes, anticipating possible schedules for draws on federal dollars and other sources in order to keep the project going. Dan Hughey is going to talk about that here a little bit more. We've increased oversight from the governor's office. We've enhanced the team structure. If you really view this as the banking and investor sort of aspect with the RDA and IFA, and then the construction business owner being the South Shore Train, we have formalized a process to make sure that those accountabilities are there, and there's checks and balances between all parties, and that we're performing as we have predicted to you. And we've also been performing independent reviews to assure that the things that we're submitting to the FTA are of high quality and, if you will, in the FTA's language, so that we don't have an issue there. We have, if we can discuss very quickly, because it does pertain to the finance, the team structure itself. RDA, or Regional Development Authority's role in this is the fiscal officer for the state and really the largest cash and debt investor in the Westlake program. So we're an amalgamation of the local and state revenues there as well. NICD is the owner-operator of the South Shore, and as I said, they would be the responsible agency for submitting the application with the FTA, recognized by the FTA as the official applicant, and would continue to own and operate South Shore, as I said, but be the procuring agency as well in the construction process. And then the IFA, represented by Dan Hughey here today, of course, is the state's finance agency that will issue debt for both projects and has taken on the role of helping us construct something that's viable in the market, but also always protecting the AAA bond rating of the state of Indiana in this process and trying to eliminate as much risk as we can and finance costs along the way. To that end, we have outlined the roles and responsibilities for each in those defined lanes and have developed a formal governance agreement, which has been adopted by all 3 boards of directors and spells out, again, how we're going to be operating the finance plan, how construction works. It talks about things like step-in rights and other things, and then in terms of NICD's protection or South Shore's protection, the timely processing of the invoices and finance so that we're not leaving them kind of hanging in the breeze in terms of the project. We're not stalling on that end or creating redundancy. So while it looks like there's a lot going on here, really what's happened is we've established a process which ends up being the lead. If there's any kind of conflict in the process along the way, then the state budget director would act as the determinative person to make the final decision. So we even have a process there for that. And again, this is just to make sure that we are protecting against cost overruns, schedule delays, and funding shortfalls, and really trying to tightly manage the fiscal aspect of the project along with the construction. At this point, I would like to ask Dan Hughey to talk about the project funding overview.
Mr. Chairman and Budget Committee members, Dan Hughey, Public Finance Director, State of Indiana. We've been intimately involved. Up. All right, is that better? All right. I've been told my voice carries. That's the first time I've ever been told that. Thank you, Senator Talley. All right. We are, as Bill mentioned, going to be doing the funding for this project. And on the flow chart you see above, the top part of that flow chart kind of breaks out the three different, I'd call, silos of funding for this project. The first silo is what you see, the RDA bonds that are listed above, upper left. Those bonds will be issued by the Indiana Finance Authority, but backed by revenues, membership dues of RDA members, along with local income tax dollars that flow through the RDA. Those bonds will be issued by the IFA, but they'll be a conduit bond issue, meaning they're on the full faith and credit of the RDA's cash flow and not on the state of Indiana, will not be considered state of Indiana debt. At this time, the estimate on that bond issue from the RDA numbers is approximately $255 million, either bonding or cash. Again, modeling will change as we continue on. The second silo is state appropriation bonds, which I believe the legislators passed in the 2015 session. It was $6 million a year for 30 years for the Westlake project. The proceeds in cash from that would be utilized for the projects are approximately $100 million. And then the final bucket you see above is the grant anticipation notes. Grant anticipation notes are going to be necessary because the FTA, when they finally approve a project, will not supply you cash during just the construction period of 3 years. What we've heard from the FTA, that period of cash flow from them will be over a 3 to 8 year period. So we'll, in order to get the project done on a timely basis, we'll have to issue some short-term notes to get the funds in advance of when the FTA may be paying us, and those are called grant anticipation notes. Those notes are also enhanced, and you see that last box off to the side in a kind of a black color, by the Next Generation Trust Fund. The Next Generation Trust Fund is $250 million that was set aside when the Major Moves transaction or the toll road lease was set. Those funds will back the grant anticipation notes that we go into the public market to sell them, provide us a much better rating, a lower interest cost, and more proceeds for this project. And it's strictly insurance. We don't anticipate any Next Gen Fund trust dollars will be utilized to pay back these grant anticipation notes. We will have a schedule from the feds that says when they're going to pay us, on what date for the different payments by that 3 to 8 year period. We'll match our repayment of those grant anticipation notes off of those. We'll also give ourselves a 30 to 60 day buffer when those notes are supposed to be paid back in case there is a delay from the feds via sequestration. So our goal is to not draw any Next Gen funds down. If perchance that would happen, the way the legislation last session was put together is if there's a drawdown, the state budget director shall immediately refill the Next Gen Fund back up to $250 million because that's what is required by statute. So I think those are the bond issue side. And then if you look below in the lighter blue boxes, you're seeing where the repayment funds are coming from. You're seeing the local cash contributions from the RDA members, which is the local income tax. Our ballpark on that is about $4 to $4.5 million, Bill. Right. And then the RDA revenues, which are their membership dues. It's their casino admissions tax, and that's approximately $13.5 million for that. Also, on thing to mention on the membership dues, I think in the 2017 session or 2018 session,
there was some intercept language put into place. So when these funds flow from the casinos, they would normally flow to the units of government up there, then come to the RDA, then have to come to the bond trustee to pay back the bonds. To stop all those different stop-off points, the intercept mechanism will have it immediately flow from the state of Indiana to the trust account for the bonds, so there's not any delays in those funds coming. That will again allow us to get the highest rating we can and alleviate some concerns about how quickly payments will be made when they have to go through 2 or 3 different processing points. State appropriations, I've discussed before, is $6 million a year for 30 years. And then the final portion is the FTA grant dollars. Approximately $315 million of those will be used to repay the grant anticipation notes. And then there's probably another $95 million that will come in cash that we'll use on the front end when we pay for the project. The order of funding here would be the RDA bonds would be issued first to fund the project. If our application gets submitted in September, again, I'll let Mike maybe address a little more in his part of this. We'd anticipate approval late 2019. You would see a bond issue for the RDA bonds late 2019, early 20. The next silo of bonds or financing that would be issued would be the state appropriation bonds. That would be, again, I would say late 2021, early 22. And then the final chunk would be these grant anticipation notes and probably 22, maybe in more than one tranche or more than one grouping. So that would be the timing mechanism on how and when those would be issued. I know I kind of threw a lot of information out there. Glad to take some questions on that right now if you'd like.
Questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have intercept language only for the casino revenue, not for the...
I believe it's for the local income tax also.
Okay, that was
Bill?
a very good response.
Yep.
Thank you. And the other question I had was when we, hopefully a short-term, take whatever, I can't think of the word now, for the Next Generation Trust Fund, are we impacting other projects because that's going to be encumbered?
No, not at all.
No.
What'll happen here, it's sitting there as an insurance policy or an enhancement. The funds in there will continue to earn like they have been, whatever investments are there by the state treasurer.
Right.
And then every 5 years, the earnings off of that will go to NDOT for projects.
Actually, this is what I meant. I meant that they will be backing, very briefly, these grant anticipation notes, maybe 3 years. So
Correct.
in the meantime, though, those funds cannot back any other project.
They could not be utilized for anything else. That would be correct.
And has that process and timeline and budget been put in so that those funds weren't, that's a higher up than me or someone else?
They've never been used for anything.
The only thing that can be spent
Another
out of,
bonding project, something like this.
yeah, the only thing can spend is the interest earnings off of that would go to NDOT every 5 years. Now, if there would be a need to enhance another big project with the Next Gen Trust Fund, we would have to look at what has, whatever's remaining, it could be looked to be utilized for other enhancements down the road, but this would kind of lock it down for other enhancements for a short period of time.
Okay, and one more kind of convoluted question. I appreciate, probably not everyone always has to budget government shutdown or sequestration, so that's obviously brand-new planning, so good for that.
Can you speak up, please?
Oh, sorry. And so the other question, though, I have is if anyone sort of along the track decides to change, not their commitment, because we're going to intercept it, but change the design or where it starts, and that's a whole kerfluffle in this plan, right? That cannot happen.
Yeah, and I think when Mike talks on his slides, I'll let him cover that from that standpoint. All the construction and everything else on the Westlake portion will flow through. NICD will be the procurement agent. They'll acquire the land and all that process. So I'll let him address that a little further for you.
Thank you.
If that's all right.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan, and good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, rest of the committee for having us here today. Greatly appreciate the opportunity. I'll start with, and I will address the question on what would happen if there was changes to the project scope. Where we are right now with Westlake is once we get, as Bill mentioned, once we get this approval today, we're in position to submit our application to the federal government to request entry into engineering. It's a milestone in their grant process, and that gets us one step closer to achieving what we want, which is the full funding grant agreement. We will also be asking the federal government to give us a rating. You need at least a medium rating in order to advance for consideration for funding, and that's a rating that would go to Congress. FTA would report to Congress that the project has rating and that therefore it's eligible to be considered in the fiscal year 19 budget. So we're in the process right now of completing everything that's necessary to go to request entry into engineering. We're putting together project management plans. We're putting together safety and security and risk plans. All those things have to be done. We're working with the RDA and IFA for a September submission along with the funding piece. And one of the strengths of this project is that this will give us 100% of our local funding. Other projects around the country at this stage only need to submit 30% of their local share in order to be rated. The more funding you have, the higher rating you get. So this is an incredibly important part of this process. Once we submit in September, we're hoping late November or so to get a rating. The FTA takes about 5 months to evaluate your entry into engineering. There's a lot of steps that will take place in that process. That would occur somewhere around January of 2019. Then we would start a 6-month negotiation to achieve a full funding grant agreement, which would take us to approximately late summer of 2019, early fall, to get that all-important full funding grant agreement, which the FTA then locks in their commitment to fund 50% of the project. After that, we would then, this is a design build project for Westlake, we would then complete the design build, we would select the engineering construction team, go out to bid, and then start construction in 2020. This is about a 3-year construction cycle, and we'd start revenue operations approximately beginning of January of 2024. The question about what happens if there's variations along the line, this is a linear project, and there's not going to be a lot of variation on where we can go. With a lot of foresight, about 30 years ago, communities purchased the right-of-way when the CSX abandoned the Monon Railroad. So we know where we're going. We've cleared the environmental process. Part of the environmental process is determining your locally preferred alternative. That is completed. So there can be certainly some variations in construction, but the route is going to stay where it is. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the project.
Questions? Senator Talian.
I don't have any questions, I think. These projects, we've been working on both of these projects for 4 to 5 years. It's been a long time. We've spent a lot of time going over all the financing and the ins and outs and making tweaks to how the financing's going to work. Mike, how far, and I know that the Westlake application is farther along than the double tracking application. How much time do you think on the double track?
Well, Westlake, as I mentioned, Westlake completed its environmental, and that's a huge step in any of these major construction projects. The double track project, we're going for a slightly modified version of the environmental process and environmental analysis. We're trying to get a finding of no significant impact. We are still in that process. We had one stakeholder who had a concern. We just resolved that concern at my last board meeting, and so now we can finish up the environmental part of the double track process and move that. So I would say we're probably 3 to 4 months from finishing up environmental on double track, as well as finishing up the rating aspect of it as well.
Okay, and if I could just ask Bill a question. I just want to make sure that I want to be assured that, we've got everything in place for both of these projects to proceed.
Yes, thank you, Senator. It's a good question. We're still committed to the double track. It's no secret. I mean, someone asked me this question in a public setting yesterday about how much slack is left with the RDA. we put a bulk of our investment on these two projects. We can cover these two projects. We have a small amount of cushion left there for double track and annual debt service. And the reason we did that is obviously we feel strongly that these are going to be catalytic. And so, you know, after the amount of time we've been around doing quality of life improvements, so this is the thing that we as a board decided to really put the investment into. But yes, both projects can be financed the way that things are today.
Yeah, and thank you for all the time and effort that everybody has put into these projects. I think most of the people in Northwest Indiana believe that these are going to be, you know, change the landscape up there in a lot of significant ways. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you for all for your support.
Any other questions? Mr. Dudich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I know I said this last meeting, but I do want to thank the three of you. I know since February of this year, we got a kind of a jolt from the FTA. So Michael, Dan, Bill, thank you for your partnership, your cooperation, your collaboration on this. It's been a long journey, many late phone calls, many long emails back and forth. But I want the committee to know that these three gentlemen standing in front of you are the reason this project's in front of you today. They have done a huge job getting this project from where it was in February to where it is today. And I think the FTA has worked with us more than ever on this. So, gentlemen, thank you for your work, and I know Northwest Indiana and the governor greatly appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I do want to add one thing. This is from a financing standpoint. This is normally we get in front of the Budget Committee right before we're getting ready to issue bonds. In this case, we need to get this approval so we can file the FTA application. So as we get closer to issuing these different bonds in 2019, 2020, rest assured we'll keep your fiscals involved in the process like we have been, give updates, and then if necessary, if you'd like us to come back and give you an update prior to, we'd be glad to do that. But this is a very important step in getting clearance to issue these bonds from an FTA perspective. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That was the last review item. So are there any motions to remove any of the items from the agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the agenda.
Can we take that by consent, Senator Talion?
Consent?
Okay.
Consent.
All right, now we have two discussion items that Representative Porter asked to go on the agenda. So we're going to start with the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. Josh Richardson.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Josh Richardson. I am the Chief of Staff at the Department of Workforce Development. Also have Gina Ashley with me today, who is the Chief of our Unemployment Insurance Operations. The update today is brief and it's quick, but there is a lot of information that is, sort of contained within the information that's on the slide. So do catch my attention and stop me if you have questions as I move through this relatively quickly. Just as a reminder, rates in the unemployment insurance system are distributed sort of two ways. One is they're distributed on schedules based on the overall health of the fund. So we have schedules that range from Schedule A to Schedule I, Schedule A being the highest. As the trust fund is less healthy, we would move towards Schedule A, the highest rates. And then within each schedule, those rates are distributed based on employers' use of the fund, their experience balance within the fund. So within Schedule A, there's a distribution of rates to employers based on their use of the fund. However, since the legislation in 2011 to try to resolve the deficit that we had at that point in time, Schedule E has been mandated. So we've actually used none of the other schedules in the current statute since that 2011 legislation. So that is mandated through 2020, and then we will bounce back to wherever the schedules dictate unless there's action by then. Also, as a reminder, as this committee would be well aware, the trust fund loan was paid off through what we sort of term a debt swap, where we borrowed money from the general fund in order to meet a critical federal deadline. That money was quickly paid back, as reflected on a future slide here. And we closed out 2017 with $381 million in the trust fund. That number today is about $600 million, but as you'll see, that's about where we will end the year, as our first quarter revenues are by far the highest, and then we pay out benefits with less revenues the rest of the year. So on the following slide, you can see the history. On the right-hand column there, you can see we borrowed about $2.1 billion at the height of the recession. So quite a road that we've traveled to be sitting at $600 million today. Again, a lot of columns that are in this chart, a lot of information. May struggle to process it all even in this meeting, but do let us know if you have questions about what you see there. So, you know, I think for the purpose of today's meeting, I think we're all, the department included, trying to ask the question of how much money in the trust fund is enough. It's a question that we get asked often. And the second question being, how soon can we or should we get there? Didn't come today with definitive answers to those questions, but hopefully some thought at least on the first. We hear numbers kind of tossed around. I think for a long time people used the number 1 billion because it was a nice round number as what a sufficient balance would be or what a healthy trust fund would look like. This may be then new information or a new way to think about it, but there is a US DOL standard for what a healthy trust fund looks like. It's an actuarial measure, probably a little bit of a crude actuarial measure, but what it seeks to do, and this is taking some liberties to summarize, but what it seeks to do is look at your highest 3 years of payments and average those, and it says we want you to have enough in the fund to cover an average high year of benefit payments with no additional revenue. That number calculates to $1.68 billion. There are consequences that are attached to that number. They're not extremely significant. The consequence that the federal government has attached to this is they say, if we fail to meet this balance of $1.68 billion prior to a recession, and we borrow from the federal government, we would not be allowed an interest-free loan for the 9-month period between January 1 and September 30th of the first year. So the narrow scenario where this occurs is that we've failed to meet this measure. We borrow after January 1, we pay it back before September 30. If we meet the target, we get to do that interest-free. If we fail to meet that target, we pay interest. But I just want to point out that should we borrow beyond that September 30th date, we would owe interest on the entire period anyway. So there is a consequence for failing to meet this. It would apply in limited scenarios. But so this is the number that DOL has used as what a healthy trust fund looks like. They have retrofit this to past recessions nationally, and if states would have met this standard, their borrowing would have been relatively insignificant with a quick payback. As just comparison numbers here, in 2009 alone, we paid about $1.85 billion in state benefits. That doesn't include the federal benefits. In the 3-year run, in the 3 highest years, from 2008 to 2010 was about $3.9 billion. So when people ask how much is enough, obviously that's a policy question better judged by you all. There is a federal standard. I would suggest that I do think using that $1 billion number because it is nice and round may leave us a little short, and I would propose that we probably ought to think about that a little bit. Other policy considerations. So we talked about finishing 2017 with a balance of $381 million. I think that it's important to note that that's actually a greater balance than we finished 2007 with, so even prior to the recession. And you all remember this history. We were headed in a downward trend even before the recession hit. But so we're healthier today than we were then. And since the 2011 legislation, we have been structurally stable. We use that to mean we've brought in more in revenues each and every year than we paid out in benefits. Again, in the 10-year history prior to the legislation, it had been reversed. We'd paid out more than we'd brought in. And then perhaps this is an obvious point, but I think it's something that, as we've continued to look at this and try to figure out how we avoid the situation we found ourselves in the future, clearly the employer base is much larger prior to a recession than afterward. And this would just be an argument in favor of sort of forward funding this as opposed to waiting and then trying to clean up a mess on the back end of it. As I said, perhaps an obvious point, and we can quantify that if desired. So this is a forecast. Obviously, we're at a point here where, as an agency, I think we're a little reluctant to forecast out very far. We're historically low in terms of benefit payments and claimants in the system, thanks to a strong economy. So whenever anybody asks to forecast, it's always, well, if you tell me what the benefit levels will be, and we can try a little bit more to tell you what the fund will look like. We do expect to finish this year at about $637 million to the positive. There are a couple of dynamics that are going on that I also think may be helpful to note. benefits have continued to decline. We hope that that also continues into the future here. But what we're also seeing is that our revenues are declining, and if you look back at the actual sheet, you can see a little bit of that. And the reason is, as we talked about the experience rating of our system, as employers are laying off fewer and fewer people and paying fewer claims, we're seeing more employers move to the healthiest point on that schedule, meaning that even as we have an increasing tax base, we are reducing the amount of revenue we're bringing in each year. And I think that's something that, you know, for me personally, I don't think that I had anticipated would occur quite to the extent that it has. So anyways, headed in the right direction. Lots of work still out there, I think, you know, at least for us to consider. But with that, I'll answer any questions that you have about the trust fund or unemployment insurance today.
Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we ever achieved what the federal standard is in the past?
It would have been years, and I think I'd have to look back, but it certainly would have been prior to 2001. I would be willing. Thank you, Representative Porter, because in 2001, that's right. There was legislation because we had about a $2.1 billion balance in the fund at that time, which I think caused some of the actions that led to the downturn. So I'm sure that Representative Porter is correct.
Okay, and then with that, what schedule would we have to shift to? So A was the best, right? We're at E. What schedule would we have to shift to in order to make our employers?
So, and it's the magic question, right? Because what's so critical here is what the benefit payments look like.
Yeah.
If the benefit payments continue on this trend that they're on, and I've told people 4 years ago we were saying they really can't go any lower, and 4 years in a row they've continued to drop. If we stay at that level, you know, then you really are talking about a situation where Schedule E or D might get you there in some amount of years. But if you look at the chart on the benefit payments, our average benefit payments, even if you exclude those high years, we pay out about $500 million in benefits each year. And if we hit that scenario, right, we return where instead of paying $260 million in benefits, we're back to that $500 million trend, then you really are talking about having to move towards Schedule A to reach that $1.7 billion. So again, this is, and I'd love to give you a direct answer to that question, but it's so contingent upon benefit payments that unless you tell me how that scenario plays out, it's incredibly hard for us to project.
Thank you. Josh, how long has that federal standard been in place? Just since?
It's relatively new. I think it was, it is a regulation, and I believe it was a 2012 or 2013 implementation, but it has ratcheted up that number. So they've phased it in where initially they said the states must reach a high cost multiple. I think it was, you know, half of, 0.5, and they've gradually moved it up to where it's now at 1.0. That is where it stops, though. It won't continue to increase.
Okay, so in order to meet that standard, we have to have about 1.68 billion in the fund.
That is correct.
Okay. And at the rate that we're going, that we're adding money to the fund, that's going to take a few more years.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so let me just ask you, do you know what the average weeks on is, you know, for people who are collecting benefits? How many weeks are they?
All right, so I know that when I say it, I'll end up being off by a little bit, but it's right at between 12 and 13 weeks is what we would consider to be the average duration, which is just the measure of how many are on today versus divided by the claims filed.
All right, but 12 or 13, that's where we were before the recession, approximately, right? I mean, I think that was sort of a historical.
We're also sitting at a fairly historical low here, though it's less in magnitude. Obviously, during the federal extensions, that number extended. But I do believe that this 12 to 13 is historically low, even by the pre-recession standards.
No.
We would have been more around 15 or 16 weeks at that time. But again, this is all off of. I've looked at this data. Don't have it memorized. It is something we can provide.
Okay. No, that's good. Thank you.
Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, I just want to thank Mr. Chairman for allowing us to have these discussion items. We just wanted to have an update on where we are as a state. As you can see, in 2001, we had $1.68 billion. We're at 637 million. My whole point is to know that, as Doc Brown and I talked on numerous occasions, a recession is inevitable, and I just want to make sure that we're in the right position to address Hoosiers, the 6.6 million Hoosiers we have in our state, and that we want to be proactive and be prepared just in case we have this recession that comes forth. That's the reason, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for allowing us to have this conversation, discussion point today. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Next, you wanted to discuss the remote sales tax, so we've got Adam Krupp from the Department of Revenue.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. It's nice to see all of you. My name is Adam Krupp. I'm the Commissioner of Indiana's Department of Revenue. I understand that I'm the last obstacle between you and food, so to dig myself an even deeper hole, I will announce that, the purpose of being here to discuss is not to give you a magic number. I cannot tell you what South Dakota v. Wayfair will mean financially for the state of Indiana, but I'd like to discuss the case to give you some insight and perspective as to how we are approaching it and what the Department of Revenue is doing to maximize the opportunity that has been presented before us. So briefly, a couple points I want to discuss: background, where we are today, what this case does mean for Indiana, and what the department is doing to, again, maximize the opportunity that's before us. So on June 21st of this year, the United States Supreme Court did something pretty dramatic, a landmark decision in the tax world, when it overturned a court case from 1992 that said that you had to have a physical presence in a state to require a seller to be obligated to collect sales tax on behalf of all purchasers and for transactions that they conduct. This case, South Dakota v. Wayfair, completely overturns and gets rid of that requirement of physical presence. Before that and leading up to this case, how did we get there? Well, the state of South Dakota, on their own, but also on, I believe, a recommendation from NCSL, enacted legislation that said there would be this new economic nexus requirement: 200 or more transactions for sales, or more than $100,000 in gross retail sales. Once that threshold is hit, you don't have to be physically present in a state for the state to require you to then collect and remit revenue by means of sales tax back to the state. As you know, Indiana modeled that statute very shortly thereafter through House Enrolled Act 1129 in 2017. It was passed, and then the Supreme Court of the United States decided they would hear the South Dakota challenge, which put our statute essentially on hold. Our statute, which is an economic nexus variety, basically says 200 or more transactions or more than $100,000 in gross sales, and you have hit the threshold as an out-of-state seller shipping goods into Indiana, you are then required to collect and remit back to Indiana the sales tax for those transactions. Our statute was challenged by the American Catalog Mailers Association as unconstitutional right before the effective date of July 1, 2017. So our statute has been tied up in courts through the present day, which is the reason that it has not been enforced, separate and aside from the South Dakota issue that made its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. As authorized by House Enrolled Act 1129, the Department of Revenue then filed a declaratory judgment action seeking to have a court declare it constitutional to either permit or prohibit enforcement, whichever way the court ruled. By filing that action, we were statutorily prohibited from enforcing the obligation upon remote sellers, those sellers being out of state. That basically took the Department of Revenue out of the uncomfortable position of trying to enforce something that was passed that was widely known to be unconstitutional because the law of the land said that you had to have a physical presence in the state to require the seller to remit the tax. So where are we today? Wayfair decision removed the physical presence requirement. This is the biggest thing to happen in tax administration in 30 years. States are now able to tax sales into their state from remote sellers so long as that threshold of 200 or more transactions or $100,000 is met. Importantly, one thing to keep in mind as we think about this out-of-state businesses sending revenue to Indiana, we also need to keep in mind in-state Indiana businesses are impacted just as much by this because they're now selling into other states and they're being required to do something by all of the other states in the country that they have not previously been forced to do. And the Department of Revenue is going to work with all of our in-state businesses as well to make sure that we can serve as an ally for them. A couple more things quickly. Importantly, this is not a new tax. Just want to be clear about that. This is merely shifting the point of collection of sales tax. Up until now, this has been on the consumer as a use tax. When you purchase items online, for example, and aren't charged sales tax, many of you are through Amazon and other means, but if you purchase online and aren't charged the sales tax, you are required to declare that as use tax on your individual tax return when you file it with the department. Everyone does that, I'm sure, as you're all looking at each other saying, yeah, that's what I do too. However, now, instead of reporting it as use tax, when you purchase from those companies, the company collects it and sends it back to Indiana. This is merely shifting the point of collection. It's not a new tax. Also, it's not a tax on the internet. Just want to be clear about that. It is not taxing someone's use of the internet. Because remember, it is a remote seller statute and case. It is not an online sales tax case. Media sometimes mischaracterize this as an online sales tax case. You still buy things over the phone, through the mail, although the majority is over the internet. This is merely out-of-state sellers selling through any means, including the internet. And finally, where are we today? On June 27th, the Department of Revenue announced, as some of you may have seen, pending resolution of the declaratory judgment action that's still in Marion County Court, we will implement as a state on October 1st of this year. Many other states around the country selected October 1st. That is a reasonable, fair implementation date based on all of the folks that we have talked to and collaborated with. We put out a news release announcing that date. We have worked with the CPA Society here in Indiana. We have also worked with the Chamber, and we have talked to many interest groups, stakeholders, and practitioners on behalf of clients and small businesses that have told us October 1 is a very reasonable date. Just a couple of weeks ago, the department filed its motion to dismiss that declaratory judgment action because now that we have Wayfair, basically the Quill case that was the reason we couldn't do anything here, that case is gone. So for all intents and purposes, the lawsuit should be dismissed. There is now binding precedent from the U.S. Supreme Court that says what 1129 was trying to do is constitutional. We anticipate resolution, whether it could be days, it could even be weeks, but we anticipate resolution prior to October 1 so that the state will then begin registering all these businesses. Just a couple more points here. What is the impact of this decision? Okay? I cannot give you a number as I stand here today. Here is the main reason for that. And I know there are lots of numbers being put out there all over the country. Some people say, oh, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars. I think that might be irresponsible and it's just purely speculative. Here's why we can't give you a number today. We don't know how many remote sellers are out there. These are businesses that have not previously registered with the state of Indiana, and these are businesses who have sold goods into Indiana that we don't even know about today. So there could be tens of thousands of small businesses or businesses that meet that threshold. Could be a company in California, could be a company in Minnesota, someone operating a home business through their house, selling goods on the internet. We don't know they exist until they register with us. Sales tax, use tax, it's a trust tax here. So our job is to make sure all of these businesses, as many as we possibly can, register with the state of Indiana, either through InBiz, the Secretary of State's platform, or through Streamlined Sales Tax, of which Indiana is a member along with 23 other states around the country. So as we try to get the word out through press release, social media, our website, we have a page dedicated to Wayfair, which says, here's what the case did, here's what you now need to do as a business owner, and here's how you can register and what your obligations are. Our job is just to get all the businesses that might meet that threshold to come to Indiana and register, and then they will start remitting that sales tax back to us. So last point is, what is the department doing to enhance compliance? This is voluntary compliance, right? We don't know that these people in California, Texas, and Minnesota are out there until they start sending us money after they've registered. We are working with third parties. There are companies out there that through big data analytics believe that they have access to credit card and debit card information that can basically populate a list and say, we believe last year or this year, depending on which calendar year you want to look at, the following businesses met the threshold to sell goods into Indiana. You might want to contact them to confirm. So very soon, prior to October 1, we will get some of those lists and we'll triage them and say, it looks like these businesses outside the state of Indiana meet our threshold. Let's prepare correspondence. Let's invite them to register, and let's sort of engage in this collaborative process to get those businesses to fulfill the requirements from Indiana that are now placed upon them. That is what I have prepared to discuss with you, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one question. So with self-reporting, what percentage actually declared the tax on their return?
Are we talking use tax?
Yeah.
Less than 1%.
Single digits, probably less than 2%.
No kidding. Wow.
And that is something the U.S. Supreme Court acknowledged in this Wayfair decision, which I believe factored into their ultimate outcome here. All across the country, use tax compliance is historically low.
So self-reporting didn't really work out, did it?
Did not.
Okay.
To
Representative
answer
Brown.
that, if you go to LSA's Revenue Handbook, we have over 3.2 million individual filed tax returns in the last handbook year, and we had 22,000 people fill out the use tax line.
Wow. Senator Brown.
What did it cost you to purchase these lists?
The quote we've been given for one list is $10,000.
Okay. And you're getting one list, or what are you?
At this time, it's one vendor we believe that has access to all the data we could possibly need. And Indiana being at the forefront of this issue, I mean, truthfully, we are regarded right now as a leader in this conversation around the country. They came to us and said, you know, as one of the states that's out there in front of this, we'd like to offer this to you as a proof of concept to show you what we're capable of. And then perhaps we'll have a relationship down the road through a RFP government procurement process to help identify other non-reporters throughout the country.
So it would be great when you get that and you match it up, if we can see exactly. I mean, I've also seen statistics that when you look at the big players that are already paying sales tax, the Walmarts or the Amazons, that there probably aren't a whole lot of people left. And so I'm sure 10,000 is a pretty small number. And I assume also that in terms of privacy and things, so if I had bought something in California and I'm an Indiana resident, you will somehow get access to that California company's name, right? That's the idea?
We'll have the business name, not the purchaser information.
Right, so you won't have my name, you won't have my credit card information, but someone has it.
That's right. They'll use this big data analytics algorithm to then tie those purchases just numerically to the seller, not the purchaser.
So you may not know this answer, but I'd appreciate finding out. So I'm going to guess that I probably didn't give permission for my information. The business in California probably didn't, but maybe the credit card company is the one that shared the data with the company.
That's most likely through contractual arrangement. Anytime you sign up for a credit card, you get 50 pages of fine print. It's likely in there somewhere in terms of being allowed to access that data. Again, that's a contractual arrangement between this third party and the banks, something we don't have access to. It's just a matter of they're going to put together a list based on their resources. We're going to work with that list, and we're then going to send out correspondence that says, you know, based on information and belief, it's come to our attention that you may have met the threshold for Indiana's economic nexus statute. If that is the case, here's how you register, and then we wait and see.
Right, thank you.
Senator Tallien.
Thank you. It was my understanding that when Indiana adopted the language that it did, which is the same as South Dakota, that we all did this to sort of keep everybody on the same page so that when it went to the Supreme Court, we'd all have the same language. Now that they've broken the ceiling and the physical nexus is no longer required, do you see states starting to change the numbers So instead of maybe $100,000, maybe we move it down to 75, maybe we move the number of transactions. Do you see that that's going to start happening?
Yeah, and we've seen it already, which is unfortunate, because consistency and all of the states, to the extent possible, doing the same thing decreases the burden upon these businesses, and that's critical. The U.S. Supreme Court even said in its decision there are 3 key factors. They didn't say this is a test, this isn't a bright line rule, but the 3 key factors that led to this result are a safe harbor for small businesses, specifically the 200 transactions and $100,000 as an economic nexus threshold. So that was point number 1. Point number 2 was no retroactivity, in terms of some states saying, well, now that the Supreme Court has said Quill is no good, we're going to go back 2 years and assess tax on all these sellers. This is money they never collected, and you would bankrupt these businesses. So safe harbor, no retroactivity. And third, South Dakota, much like Indiana, is a member of the Streamlined Sales Tax Agreement. And everyone is saying, if you have these 3 factors, your statute's okay, and it's going to hold up to a constitutional challenge. There are other states, however, out there. Some states, Hawaii was first, they said, you know what, we're going to apply retroactively. We're going to go back a year. People put a lot of pressure on them, and they have since retracted that. Pennsylvania right now has an economic nexus statute that says $10,000. People are already talking about a potential legal challenge there because the Supreme Court specifically blessed $100,000. You are seeing other states come up with statutes that mirror Indiana's and South Dakota's. Some states, larger states like New York, Texas, they're talking about higher numbers. So instead of $100,000 in total gross sales this year or the year before, they're looking at $250,000, even $1 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Representative Brown?
And I think just to comment, at NCSL, there are some businesses in some states, New Hampshire, for example, that doesn't have a sales tax, are going to the federal government to ask them for, further kind of qualification guardrails, restrictions. And NCSL has taken, and the Tax and Local Government Task Force has taken the position, federal government, please do nothing.
Representative Porter?
I just want to thank you again for allowing this to become a discussion item, something that's very important to all of us. And as you can tell, it did spur some education for all of us, as well as some discussions, and look forward to seeing where we are in regards to particularly those 3 points that you made, and how it does help us in this great state. And also to say thank you to former State Senator Luke Kennedy.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may just close
Sure.
with one thing, and that is, as we work through this and find out who's registering in terms of how many and what the dollars look like, we are building a dashboard to track this. So as folks have questions, and as we get through legislative session and people want to say, for example, how many registrations are we seeing from these out-of-state companies as a result of Wayfair? How much money is being added into the base? We're monitoring that, and we'll be happy to work with you guys to answer questions along those lines.
Any other questions for Adam? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Taylor, do you want to share your?
No, we can save it for.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't want you to think I forgot about you.
I know you didn't forget about it.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Do you want to say something? It's just going to be in October, that's all I can tell you right now. I don't know. I'm just going to say October, because it's not in stone yet. We didn't really schedule it yet. So. Okay, all right. All right. One announcement is we will have a budget meeting in October. Date and location still to be determined. But I wanted to thank the folks in Evansville and the mayor and the chamber and USI for hosting this. Dr. Rochon, wish him the best. But it's my first trip to Evansville, Indiana, and so it was a wonderful trip. What a beautiful campus here. The development along the river there, So there's a lot going on. I got to see the success of regional cities in this region. So again, thank you for hosting us, and with that, we'll adjourn.